Jazelle, finally, we got a chance to do this. I'm really thankful for you coming on here and doing this because you and I have a lot in common, and you've been on my radar, as I told you, for a while now. We have a lot of mutual clients, and I'm a little bit weary sometimes with the people in the benzo community because there's kind of a dichotomy of different schools of thoughts in here, and and I am used to being kind of on the outside of that a little bit with some of my ideas. So I was really happy to see that you kind of echoed so much of my approach as well, which was great. And I wanted to get you on here to be able to talk to you and expose you to my audience and pick your brain a little bit. So thank you for coming
Sure.
on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
It's my
great.
pleasure.
So, if you don't mind, I imagine, like I said, probably a lot of my clients already, or my, viewers would already be familiar with you, but could you give me just a little bit of your background and kind of how you came into the benzo community?
Yeah. Well, I started out as a nurse back in 1999, and then it took me a while before I finally went back to school and became a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And my journey as a nurse started in med surg, and then I went into geriatric Alzheimer's, for
Mm.
8 years. Then when I moved to Florida, I actually got back into the hospital setting, did some hospice home health, and then got back into psych. But this was more like a crisis unit, detox unit. And then
Mm.
I went back to school. So the process of what brought me to where I am now is, as far as with the benzo specifically, is that during my studies as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, I started realizing that this whole dynamic of just giving people a pill and was just like, to me, was just very short, like the time we have with patients and clients. And I started questioning a lot of the things we were doing.
Mm.
And then, so my radar was already up, and I already knew that I wanted to do more of a holistic approach
Right.
because I started getting into more of that integrative mental health when I started questioning, like, what are we doing in psychiatry, and started looking at what else was out there, alternatives. So when I graduated, I already knew I wanted to do integrative psychiatric mental health approaches. But as a brand new, psychiatric nurse practitioner, I didn't have a lot of options. So I kind of got stuck into doing community health and
Yeah.
that type of work. So it was 15-minute visits, kind of a thing, in and out, in and out. And I had a patient who was on clonazepam for quite some time, 1 milligram 3 times a day. And I'm used to patients just wanting, obviously to keep that where they are and not, but I always said, hey, these with long-term use, I always told them about that. And then I would prefer that we worked on a plan to taper off, but little did I know that it would be troublesome.
Right.
So this client actually said that, hey, brought up, I would like to come off of the Klonopin. I think it's affecting me. She was in her 50s and she's having problems with cognitive issues, feeling like she was more off balance.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this one gets it. Like, this is great. Perfect. Yes, yes, someone who actually wants to taper.
Right.
So I said, all right, let's go ahead and start. So I started cutting by half, which I know is wrong now, but I didn't really know too much at this point in time. I was reading stalls and kind of looking at what he had recommended in the prescriber's guide, which is for psychiatrists and psych nurse practitioners, like our Bible, right?
Right.
So I started cutting her back to, I actually went to 1 milligram twice a day. She was tolerating that fairly well. Then we went to zero point 0.5 milligrams twice a day. So now we're down to 1 milligram. And I did that for a month. So I was going a little slower than what he recommended. I was doing month to month. But when we got to from the 1 milligram twice a day to the zero point 0.5 twice a day, it was like all hell broke loose. And she was just a mess. And she was having akathisia. And she was saying that, she wasn't feeling very well. And I'm like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? So I started talking to my colleagues there, but they were all thinking she's just drug seeking. We've known her for so long. Like she's messing with you.
Mm.
She just wants more, but doesn't want to tell you she wants more. Like, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, what do you
Right.
mean? Like she's told me she wants off of this stuff,
Mhm.
and anyway, they labeled her borderline and whatnot, and it just wasn't making sense. So I did go back up to 1 milligram twice a day, but then I reached out to a student group at Eastern Kentucky University, which was my alma mater, and was like, hey guys, like what's going on? And with the benzos, like, are you guys having issues, whatnot? And I had already seen someone post the Ashton manual prior.
Right.
And I was like, wait a minute. So I went and I was like, this is great. This is what I need to do. So I brought that to her. And then lo and behold, I found the Ashton manual. We transferred over to Valium and everything went very, very smoothly. Now, that is not the case for everyone who does Ashton, but that's how I started.
Right.
And that's how I continued in my practice then when someone wanted to come off of, benzodiazepines, went right to the Ashton manual, did it with Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan. Those are the three main ones that I've done it with. Then things tended to shift later on in my practice, where I got out of the community mental health and started like my own thing because I was doing the educational videos on YouTube already and started shifting the videos to like, hey, people need to know more about this,
Right.
and started and made a couple of benzo awareness videos. And that brought more people asking questions and wanting help. So I decided that, hey, let me start my own kind of a coaching thing, level-headed mind. And then I ended up moving from where I was up here to where I am now, which is Vero area,
Mm.
and started working in that private practice. And they allowed me to kind of, it's not insurance based or anything like that. So I can kind of work with patients with
Mm.
flexibility and time and those kinds of things, and not have those constraints of insurance.
Right.
But by and large, I see about half of my patients are coming off of some kind of medication. It kind of expanded into beyond benzos, where I do antidepressants as well. But what I found too that also shifted in practice, which I think has to do with where we are in I don't know if it's the research or where these communities kind of aim at, or what the conversations are in those communities. Because like I said, I was doing Ashton for quite some time. And then I started getting patients from these other communities. And it was like, oh, don't you know Valium doesn't work? I'm like, what? Like I've been
Right.
doing it for so long. Like, what do you mean? No, no, people get worse on Valium.
Right. Right.
And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, well, if this is the way you think about it, then I guess so. I guess we'll keep you on your benzo. We'll do it that way. But that's going to now, create a little bit more of a next step, so to speak. So that's when now you have to do compounding. And so then you
Right.
have to find compounding pharmacies that are willing to work with you and all of that. So then my practice shifted more to this whole hyperbolic using liquid kind of taper that was guided by patients, but I'm not so sure it's guided 100% by literature.
Right.
Though we do have, the Maudsley deprescribing guides that also, recommends that kind of a taper. So I guess there is now some literature behind it. But when I was getting into it, it didn't seem like there was a whole lot of backing
Right.
behind it, but just a lot of rumor and talk about it.
Right.
So now what I do is I basically meet the patients where they're at
Mm.
and ask, and try to do something is called motivational interviewing, find out where they are in the process, how much are they willing to change, what they're doing in their lifestyle to move
Right.
forward, as well as what are their beliefs and what are their limiting beliefs, because I
Mhm.
think that ultimately is going to determine the success of the taper.
Sure.
So I know that was a long answer
No,
to
no,
the
it was great.
question, but it's
No, it
kind
was
of like
great.
how I got here and where I am
Yeah.
now and what I do.
Yeah, and so many things there we could we could jump off onto the hyperbolic taper. I'm not a huge fan of it, and that's created some riff with some people. Of course, like you, I think you tailor the taper and a lot of this to the client and what they need
That's
and where
right.
they are. You meet them, but you
Mhm.
also understand these people, most of us going through it are really afraid. We're terrified. And so I think there's a little bit of danger there. There's a
Yeah.
risk there where the person, if you allow them to, they will taper so slowly that maybe they take 5 years to taper off or 10 years to taper off. And then, someone like myself with a background in clinical psychology, I have to question, is risk versus reward in that situation. It's like, what are the consequences of sitting in 5 years in acute withdrawal off a drug? I don't even know if we fully understand what the consequences of something like that is. We're not supposed to take 5 years to come off of and be in withdrawal alone. And as if that didn't present its own problem, but then the manifestation of other mental illnesses that could arise. So
Yeah.
if you become debilitated and you're tapering that slowly, and you're in bed for years, and your rumination is just running wild, and you're becoming massively depressed and deconditioned, and you're developing health anxieties and agoraphobia and all of this stuff, then it's sort of like, which is worse? Do you go a little bit quicker, within reason, or not? I think that needs to be addressed, and we can't, so much in the benzo community. And I've been here a decade, 12 years. 12 years I've
Yeah.
been reading this and watching this community. And I've watched it over these 12 years. I've noticed a consistent, it's like Old Testament, New Testament, Newer Testament, but it's always very, this is what we do. It's very
Mhm.
black and white. It's very set rules on things. Okay, Ashton Manuel was king for a while. Okay, now this, now that. And I think you need to be flexible a little bit, right? Like you should let,
Mhm.
a hyperbolic taper is probably great and probably ideal for certain people. And then other people, maybe it's not. And maybe
Yeah.
the Ashton manual is more ideal for those people and not for other people. So I like the idea of having some flexibility in all of this. And I think that's where personally I bump heads with some people in the community. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Flexibility is key. You have to meet the person where they're at. And I find that there are these different aspects and dichotomies within the groups that I found with clients that come to me from different places. And there's the purist, so they're the ones who don't want anything.
Right,
So they don't want, even if I show them their nutrient levels are low, they don't want the vitamin D. They don't want anything.
right.
Because if you ever go on the BIC site, they have a very long laundry list, and I wouldn't recommend going there if you haven't seen it because
Yeah,
you'll be afraid to take anything.
exactly.
Just about everything's on there.
Yeah,
So there's that group. And then there's the other group who it's all very new to them. So they haven't really
yeah,
tapped into the communities. So they're more open to trying,
right.
like they may have seen just a couple of my videos and they're like, I really like that approach with the Valium. I
Yeah,
really want to go there. Can we
yeah,
do that? Can we try that?
right,
And I always tell them, the different methods that they can try and then kind of let them, what do you think, you
yeah,
would like to do? Or I would say based on also your symptoms, because some people are or interdosing withdrawal. So
right,
if we stick with what they're on, we're not going to really alleviate that interdosing withdrawal, and I make that
right,
clear. We
right,
do need a longer acting benzo like diazepam to alleviate
right,
interdosing withdrawal. But despite that, some people still choose to stick with what they know because it's what they're comfortable with.
yeah,
And then they're afraid because of all of the stories that are out there from switching.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, there are a lot of um, gray. There's a lot of gray
Yeah.
in this, and it's not black and white. And I think
That's right.
that is what is most important for people to
Right.
understand. Each person is individual, and so yes, you choose your path. That's how I work with you. But if you're so rigid in one area and afraid to do anything, it does make it harder. It does
Absolutely.
make it harder. I
Absolutely.
find it that the ones who are the purist and listen to all of the information that's out there regarding
Yeah.
this thing's bad for you, that thing's bad for you, everything is going to be bad
Yeah.
for you because you believe it's going to be bad for you.
Absolutely.
And the
100%.
power of the mind is something that we cannot under score or emphasize
Yeah.
enough
Yeah.
in this,
Hmm.
because there are studies out there that show the power of our mind and how we think about something can change our biology.
Right.
And I think that is so important to remember. If you think that what you're taking is poison, your body's
Right.
going to react like it's poison. So I think that people need to stop calling their benzo poison, but also stop calling other things bad for you too. Vitamin D is
Right.
not bad. Magnesium
Right.
is not bad. These supplements, that nutrients are found in food.
Right.
And if your body needs it,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you can't make cofactors without it. Like you can't make those neurotransmitters and you can't support brain inflammation
That's right.
without proper nutrients. So you're just going to make the road tougher for you
Right.
if indeed your biology shows that you need this stuff. So I
Yeah.
think that that is also super important. We can't
Yep.
label things good and bad in that
I totally
regards
agree.
because it
Yep.
creates harm for people who need it.
Totally agree. And I love everything you're saying because, I think you and I had a short conversation. I said, like, I am the black sheep of the benzo community. And I think it's slightly starting to change because the attitudes, because, you know, like I said, I've been here a long time and I've watched how fundamental and rigid every idea was. Like, I mean, they treat it like the plague. You can't take vitamin D. Oh my God, you know. And now things are starting to get there, but this is something I've been hammering on for so long. I mean, literally close to a decade, I've been trying to say the same thing. It's like, I always knew the mind was powerful. And then the more I study psychology, you start to learn, like you said, that our thoughts, what's real in our mind is real to the brain. Right, they've done functional MRIs, and even if they show, or an apple or something, or a certain emotion that they elicit, the brain reacts very real to these things, right? And so you start to go, okay, well, the brain's powerful, but no, I mean, I feel like there's got to be studies done at some point on uh, what we're talking about here in this specific population of benzo people, because I don't think there's any other population where the power of psychogenic effect or nocebo, power of suggestion is
Mhm.
this rampant and such influential as it is with anyone. Like, I have clients that will put themselves in a way, true story, because they went outside to check the mailbox in the sunlight and they thought they got too much sun, and they thought, oh my God, I just had an antidepressant effect. I got too much vitamin D and synthesized too much serotonin from the sun. And they're literally in a wave for weeks. And I have to like go, no, that doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Sunlight's good. It doesn't work that way. Like, if you understood how much sunlight is actually needed to be even, therapeutic, like you can't, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
But they can talk themselves into this. And so
Mhm.
so many, like, what you're highlighting is, it's a real problem for me. It's been a huge problem. The best client I have is the client that knows nothing.
Mhm.
Those ones I go, oh, thank you God, when I get those ones, and I go,
Mhm.
how long have you been in the benzo community? What do you know? They go, oh, I don't really know anything. I just found you on Google. And I go, this is going to work. I just already have a better sense of things. And 9 out of 10 times, it goes smoother than any of the other clients that understand and are plugged into these sites because they have no apprehension. If
That
I
is so
say, hey,
true.
let's try a little magnesium, and even then, even if they don't have any apprehension, I still think it's probably wise to kind of gradually build up to whatever you're going to do. Yeah, so, maybe if they're really sensitive to magnesium, we'll start with pumpkin seeds or something that has
Yeah.
high magnesium, and we'll just gradually build up, because it's not just the biology, but it's the limbic system. This sense of
Mhm.
this danger reading, alarm system in the brain that's not welcoming anything new. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't care. I mean, I tell clients all the time, like you could have the same dose of benzo Valium, let's say, and we could just change the dye color, and that's enough to completely convince your brain something and put you in a wave. It's completely psychologically induced. But it's not to say again it's in in your mind. I hate that expression because people will get
Mhm.
feel gaslit, like, oh, they're trying to say this is all in our head. No, not at all. It's in your brain. But that's just how
Mhm.
powerful your mind is, which is
Yeah.
why, I have a big problem, or I should say, a love-hate relationship with the BIC because I feel like I know they're doing good. I know they mean well. I know they're a powerful voice for change in the community, but they produce so much fear. I tell all my clients, don't go on that group. Don't stay off the group, stay off the list. Don't read that stuff. I'm telling you, you're just too vulnerable. Trust me, I will handle it. If I start to sense something, then we'll adjust things appropriately. But I don't need you running out and freaking yourself out, ahead of time. And then it
Mhm.
undermines your work. Then suddenly the vitamin D doesn't work and this doesn't work. And
Mhm.
I've even had clients where we were making amazing progress. We were doing exposure therapy, let's say, or some CBT skill set building or mindfulness meditation. And like for months, they are just thriving. I mean, they're coming off their benzo, the symptoms are going down, everything's working beautifully. And then suddenly there's a flare up, what they would call a setback. I tend to call a flare up. And then they come back to me, I pick their brain. What's going on? Well, I talked to so and so, and they said that exposure therapy doesn't work. I'm like, but it's literally been working on you, and now you're in a wave, and now you're going to abandon doing the exposure therapy, and it's tragic to me. It's like, well, and then you
Yeah.
lose them sometimes, and the fear pulls them back into those fear mongering, whether they realize it or not. And I'm not trying to demonize the benzo community. I just see there's so much fear contagion going on. And I try to remind these people like fear is a magnet and it's
Yeah.
pulling you in and and here we are saying things that are scary and new and tough for them.
Mhm.
It feels counterintuitive to their healing. I think really it makes more sense to just isolate, avoid, run back to those groups and just live in that fear, right?
Because it's what they know. And I think the other fear is the fear of the unknown, and they're looking for answers.
Right.
And so when you're looking for answers, those are the forums you're going to fall into. Now, I do believe that you need support when you're in this. I do believe that you need to have a group, because there's a lot of people who say I'm the only one, or I'm going through all this and this and this, like it must be the worst experience. Like they
Yeah.
don't realize that actually there's a lot of other people who are suffering either
Right.
like you or worse off than you, really. I mean,
Right. Right.
when you really start getting into the community, you can see that. But then I think the thing with the communities is that, and particularly the forums, is that there's a lot of people saying I have all this and this symptom, and this and this and this is what happened. And then everyone's putting their opinions in there. Oh, well, you took that. Oh, you ate avocados. It must be the avocados. Oh, no, it was
Right.
the bananas. And oh, no,
Yeah.
it was this, that, and the other. And so everybody's throwing their opinions in there and adding in their story instead of looking at the person as an individual. So it's hard to, when you go into these forums, yes, you want to see that you're not alone. You want to feel like you're not gaslit, right? That this was
Yeah.
all real. It's happening to you.
Yeah.
But then you can get caught on hanging on to these negative threads, which then feeds the fear. And then it
Yeah.
becomes this domino effect over and over and over again.
Right.
Then when you finally see your provider again, you're like, I can't do this, and this. So I didn't start anything in the treatment plan because I found out that it was all bad,
Right.
and you had a flare up. And I
Right.
think the
Right.
other piece that's missing is the discussion, the fact that they call them waves and windows or whatever, but we have waves and windows in life, period.
Yeah.
I have waves and windows. I never had a benzo story or injury or anything like that, but
Right.
I get waves and windows. Yes, I do have, anxiety and a history
Yeah.
of PTSD and all of that.
Right.
So yeah, but then I look at my husband, he has waves and windows. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? Like if you look at everyone in life, You're going to
Right.
have ups and downs.
Yeah.
And yes, the benzo and withdrawal can make those ups and downs a little harder,
Yeah. Right.
but we have to normalize life. We have to normalize
Yeah.
that, the ups and downs of life and
Right.
the waves and windows of life, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Because if we start hyper fixating on a down or a wave, you can then create an environment where it's all a wave,
That's
or the
right.
wave is longer than it really should have been.
Right.
And I could do that too. Like if I have a bad day and I just fester on the way that someone spoke to me in a session, like made me feel uncomfortable, and then I start getting down on myself and I just keep focusing on it and making it go over and over and over in my head. And then I talk to my husband about it, and then I talk to someone else, like, I can't believe this is happening to me. What's wrong with me? And then I start saying, oh, my stomach hurts too. And now
Mhm.
I feel like this. And then I start hyper fixating on
Right.
every single thing that's going on with me. Then I can make myself become fearful of going into sessions with someone who's also
Right.
suffering, right?
Right.
You could do that. You can do that in pretty much anything. You can create a fear-based response and then heighten and feed
Yeah.
that fear
Yeah.
to make it a monster. So it's no
Right.
longer like a little, maybe subconscious, like,
That's
man,
right.
that made me feel uncomfortable. It's now like this big monster in the room that
Yeah.
you can't ignore.
Right.
And so, yeah, I do believe forums can be helpful for supportive, and I do believe there's supportive communities out there. You have a very supportive community where you can get positive feedback. So when you're
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
a community, I think one of the things to look at is there are people talking about the hope? Are people talking about the ups? Are people
Right.
talking about windows, or are they stuck in the waves? I
That's
think
right.
that is a good kind of benchmark to go when you go into these communities.
Yeah.
What is the pattern? What are people talking about? What is the
Yeah.
primary topic that's being driven in that community?
Yeah.
And if the primary thing is hope and positivity and how we can overcome the
Yeah.
waves versus let's just talk about the waves and be stuck in it,
Yeah.
then you're in a good community. So I think
Right.
that's something to also, let people know, is that they
Right.
can be supported in a positive way, not all
Absolutely.
have to be negative.
Yeah. Totally echo everything you said there. Um, and like you were saying about how, the fear could be kind of bred in your own life with your own experiences with, like, say, a tough client. But then it can, you could really watch how those wheels could come off, because then, say, you start to dread that client. And then one day you have a panic attack before your session and you think, oh my God, I can't have this session now. So you have to cancel that session, and then you lose money, and then the client becomes upset with you. And then the next week it's more likely to happen again. And then, so then you cancel that client, and then the wheels just start to come off. And then your brain says, oh my God, if I can't take clients because I'm now developing this fear response to my work, what the hell's going to happen? I'm going to lose my
Mhm.
job. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my livelihood. My life's going to fall apart. You end up staying up at night. You can't sleep now because you're thinking about this problem.
Yeah.
It's the birthing of, like, mental illness is so delicate. It can happen
Mhm.
so subtly, and it can catch on like wildfire quickly. And
Yeah.
you're totally right about normalizing the windows and waves. And so,
Mhm.
I told you before, I think I'm working on this new book idea of or new book on 15 phases of benzo recovery, like phases
Mhm.
that I observed. And one was the yo-yo phase. I called it the yo-yo phase because it was windows, waves, windows, waves, windows, waves. And I noticed a lot of times, especially, it started to happen towards the end. And I
Mhm.
saw it as a good thing. I said, look, you went from locked in fight or flight to your brain's releasing and then creating this sort of guarding reflex back to you. And
Mhm.
part of the, way I help them work through that is indeed normalizing it. I say, when you have a wave, it's a test. And also what's happening is your brain is sending out a lot of times kind of I almost look at it like a shock wave of fear, as a voice, like almost as the limbic system sends out the fear and then says, I think we're in danger, Giselle. and then it sits back and waits to hear how you respond. And if you go, "Oh my God, we're in danger," and run, and it goes, "Okay, I thought so. Here's more fear. Here's more
Mhm.
hyperarousal. Here's more adrenaline." And
Yeah.
so our job is to sit there and completely normalize it. It's not a pretty process. I wish psychology and what we knew was, I wish there was better options. It's a clunky feature of evolution. It's great when there's a grizzly bear, and it's terrible when you're sitting on your couch and you just got to sit
Yeah.
there and pretend there's no grizzly bear. God, I feel like there's a grizzly bear in the room. No, just pretend there's no grizzly bear. Just breathe and don't react to it. And it's like, yeah, it's really hard and it's not pretty. And I wish there was better, techniques for this. But this is a
Mhm.
stubborn part of our brain, and it is always going to be a better outcome than listening to the fear and jumping up. And then, you have all these communities building a narrative, which you don't need a community to build a narrative. Once the
Mhm.
fear hits you, your brain loves to fill in the blanks, right? You don't sleep for one night. Oh my God, is this dementia? Is this, your brain will go there. You don't, and then you jump on a forum and then 20 other people say it's dementia. And now you're not sleeping for the next 3 days. And you see this reinforcement happening all over, like an echo chamber of fear and hysteria from respectively people who don't have backgrounds in mental health, who are in the
Yeah.
trenches. I mean, I think they forget, like, you're in the trenches. Maybe you're not seeing this thing clearly,
Yeah.
and then he built up this defense and you can't trust anyone. And then before you know it, the only ones they trust are the others in the trench echoing the same thing. And they don't realize it's just fear running amok
Mhm.
completely at that point. So you're totally right. Like normalizing it, and I love that you said that I'm off benzos 12 years now. This will be 12 years this October, and I still have windows and waves, if you want to call it that. Life goes up and down. I have good days, I have bad days, I have good weeks, I have good months. You have catastrophes that break down in your life. Sometimes you
Mhm.
just wake up and you're like, I'm in a funk.
Yeah.
You know, 2 days ago, I remember grocery shopping. I was like, I just feel anxious in the grocery store. I don't even know why. There's nothing on my mind. There's nothing going on, but it's just, I don't know. What was that about? I call it neurological weather. It's just like weather.
Mhm.
It changes sometimes. And I almost think the benzos gave us a false sense of what we think life is supposed to be. Because if every time, I was on benzos for 10 years, every time I got anxiety, I could take that pill, put out the
Yeah.
fire. I didn't have to build any skill sets. And then you come to get normal, you kind of normalize the idea that life's supposed to just be flat. It's just supposed to go like this the whole time. And if you're not here and happy and thriving, something is really wrong. And it's
Yeah.
totally not true. And so you can see, when someone's coming off a benzo and yeah, there's withdrawal and those waves are harder and they're being maybe more amplified or even created by chemical withdrawal to some degree. But then life starts to happen and there's these two waves now meeting, and somewhere in the
Mhm.
middle, the narrative complicates the whole damn thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard. It becomes hard to decipher life from withdrawal, especially post acute withdrawal. Like when someone's
Yeah.
off of the benzo, now they're kind of stuck in that state. It is
Mhm.
hard to then say, okay, is this life? Am I still in withdrawal? And I
Right.
think people get stuck in that pattern of thinking for longer than they need to be, because at some point you just have to say, this is my new normal, this is life,
Yeah.
and let go of the withdrawal.
Right.
Like
Right.
let go of taking every little symptom and saying it's withdrawal.
Hmm.
You have to at some point just say, okay, like accept, and this is where
Yeah.
acceptance and commitment therapy comes into play, where you
Wow.
have to learn at some point you have to accept what it is and live despite
Right.
the symptoms.
Right.
So you may be experiencing some anxiety here and there, or you may start feeling like some people will have palpitations that kind of come and go for no reason. They've been checked by a cardiologist, everything's good. It's not AFib, it's not,
Right.
anything like that. It's just anxiety, and they'll think, and or this post-acute withdrawal type of a symptom that's lingering,
Yeah.
but you can still live with that. And like you mentioned, when you have it, sit with it,
Yeah.
and say, okay, all right, I'm in the grocery store. I'm feeling a little anxious. You know what? But today's a good day. You look around. I'm not in
Hmm.
fear. I'm not going to run out of the store,
Right.
because if you run out of the store, now you just fed the fear.
That's right.
So you have to learn to accept the state that you're in, do the grocery shopping like you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Come home and maybe then sit and analyze like what could have been happening. Was I triggered while I was driving to the store? Did someone
yeah,
make me upset? Was there, so did I
yeah,
almost get into an accident or something like that? And maybe that's what was running in the back of my mind while I was grocery shopping.
sure.
But if you feed into it at that moment, then now you're giving it power
Yeah,
over
totally.
you. So it is a lot of, at some point you have to, it just has to be your life. You can't just keep calling it post-acute withdrawal, or even bind is the
Yeah,
newer term for
mhm,
this, in the literature, or how they did the survey and created
right.
that terminology, um, which is fine, whatever you want to call it and whatever you want to say that it is. At some point in time, you still have to live,
Hmm.
despite whatever neurological symptoms are running in the background, and try to
Sure,
live to the best quality of life that you have. And I
absolutely.
find that the clients who do that are the ones who heal the
Yeah,
fastest. They're the
yeah,
ones who get it, and then they start accelerating their healing. They're the
yeah,
ones who realize, oh my gosh, I can actually exercise again, and it's not going to affect my
100%. Yeah,
dopamine and serotonin. And like you were saying, the lady who, or the client who went out to the mailbox, or, you
right,
know what
right.
I mean? Like you can still go for a walk and get sun and start to feel like, oh, okay, that was actually good for me,
Yeah,
and start
yeah,
doing it baby steps, in the beginning, because it's something that's going to be out of the norm. But you can incorporate those things in your day
right,
to day and start living life. And then it becomes less and less of a problem, because now you're just living life and you're doing, things that you would quote unquote normally do.
right. I think there's a large degree of trauma, like complex PTSD,
Oh,
that runs through a lot of my clients, and I think I
mm,
even myself experienced it. And I think a lot of that reflex to keep calling it windows or waves, or to avoid things, or to, what happens. I think a lot of that's from trauma, for one, but I think it becomes like a
mhm.
reflex where everything gets put under the microscope of benzos, no matter what symptom. If your toe hurts, is this benzo related? Oh my God, it's toe neuropathy from peripheral nerve damage from the benzo. I shouldn't have been on that Valium, damn it. And it's like the whole mechanism, the stickiness of it all. And there's so much that I've observed, again, from the lens of like clinical psychology, that like if you really study clinical psychology and then you look at the benzo community, it's like this isn't new. It's new to
Yeah,
the people because they don't know what they're looking at, and it's new to them. It's a new experience. It seems wonky, and they're getting all this coming in from every other angle. But I go, there's people who have PTSD, anxiety, depression, health anxiety, somatic
mhm.
symptoms disorder, insomnia, and they've never taken a benzo or psych med, and they have the same symptoms you have.
Yeah,
They have the same symptoms. If you were sitting there at a coffee shop talking about your condition, and you just assume they had come off a benzo, you would never be none the wiser. They have so many similar symptoms. And I'm not
yeah,
saying, again, for anyone listening, I'm not saying that benzos is all something else. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying the way it impacts the brain and all this is not new under the sun for people that study this stuff. It's not like, whoa.
hmm,
I mean, there are very unique features of benzo withdrawal for sure, that's different, that would take that person and make their situation different than the person that just had PTSD. But I'm talking just symptomology. If you're sitting there listening to these people, you go, wow, you get heart palpitations, and sometimes your face will go numb, and sometimes you can't sleep, and then all these weird things. You go, yep, 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 totally. And when and that was a big piece for me to get out of that trauma response, because I was stuck in that too for maybe a couple years coming off benzos. I mean, everything that happened was under the microscope of, is this a benzo symptom? And oh my God, is it permanent? Will it never go away? Am I doomed to live this way? I mean, it's a terrifying thought. It's a
yeah,
terrifying thought to keep thinking that you're only getting this better, and then you're going to level off, and then you're just going to have to get used to the idea that this is your new norm. And ironically, what you need to do to get better in a way is embrace that. I mean, the
yeah,
idea is you will get back to 100%. That's why I tell
yeah,
everyone, you will. I promise you, you will get back. I've seen the worst cases. I've seen people that were bedbound for 5 or 6 years and things like that nature, and watch
yeah,
them fight their way back. You can get back, but it will be a hell of a harder much uphill battle if you're going to keep putting these roadblocks in front of yourself based on these false narratives in your mind about, so in a sense you do, it's funny, my approach is so much between like mindfulness, which is very acceptance and soft and surrendering, and then the stoicism's approach, the stoic
Mhm.
approach of like normalize it and push through it. Just
Mhm.
be okay with it. What if this is as good as I get? What if it is? Make peace with that now. It won't be. I promise you it won't be, but make peace with it. It's the same feature
Mhm.
with like insomnia.
Yeah.
You have like one bad night of sleep and you go, oh my God, your brain panics. And then you start to kind of, the house of cards start to come down from there.
Mhm.
Right. And it becomes this self-fueling, circular problem. The more you try to resist, the more you analyze, the more effort you throw at it, the more hyperarousal is produced, the less you sleep, and round you go until the wheels come off.
Yeah.
And so one thing we're doing in my school, which I'm so proud of these people, we got probably 100 people or more now in there, and it's such a beautiful thing. It's like having a chorus, and everybody is reading the same notes from the same keys, and now it's this beautiful harmony that starts to happen. And every once in a while, you get somebody that's out of key or something, but the others will just sort of gently guide them back in. No, no, we're singing in the key of key. We're singing in the key of healing. But what
Mhm.
about, no, 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 we're singing in the key of healing. And then, it's no longer about me just saying these things because they're watching it now. Now they're watching the woman who came in and was, maybe bedbound or couldn't drive her kids to soccer practice in the last 3 years. And in 2 or 3 months, she's starting to do it again. And she's getting back out and grocery shopping and she's normalizing her symptoms. It's, and so to your point, I mean, yes, that's what we need. We need an echo chamber of, we need to reverse engineer where things have gone wrong, and we need the antithesis of all the fear, which is seeing people win, seeing people heal, seeing
Yeah.
people grow, and then that catches on, right? It's like that old quote, show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right?
Mhm.
It's so true. Show me your friends, I'll show you your future. Who's around you? Because that's what you're going to become. So if you
Yeah.
see people winning and getting their life back together and changing their lifestyle, because I think benzos requires a lifestyle change to a large
Oh,
degree,
yeah.
right?
Huge, 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 huge. Yeah.
Yep, you
Yeah.
need a lifestyle change, and I see it as, I almost feel like I'm so far on the fringe now with this because, in a way, I'm starting to look at benzos as like this beautiful opportunity for self growth.
Mhm.
It's like it's this great challenge in your life, but God, it's a chance where you can get it all right again. It's a
Yeah.
chance that's going to come around and challenge you, and the what you eat and how you approach sleep, and are you a type A personality, and all these things. It's going to force you to go back and finally address these things and learn the skills and the knowledge and all of that stuff. But the silver lining is, if you do, when you come out of it, you really have a chance to become a better human being and be happier and more at peace and more driven. I hated benzos. It was the single worst thing that's probably ever happened to me. And I've been a victim of a hate crime where I almost was murdered. I've watched family members that died. I've been through painful breakups and everything in between. And I will say benzos was the worst thing that ever happened. I mean, it really somehow trumped all of those things because
Mm.
it just went on for so long. I mean, you have a tragedy, you can heal, but Benzo's was like this scab, this wound that just wouldn't heal, and we never knew if it would. You lose someone, "Oh, this is so terrible, and I'm gonna miss them forever, but I'm gonna mourn them. It's a process, and things will get better." But this
Mhm.
terror of 2 or 3, 4 years of not knowing, it was really horrible. And I look at that now and I go, you know what? In a strange way, I might have, you know, I kind of embraced that it happened because it made me a better person today. I don't know if
Right.
I would have chose it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it definitely had, I got to be honest, it made me a better person. I mean, I don't even know the guy that I was a decade ago that was going through this.
Yeah. That I think is key. And I found that too. The ones, so what I've been finding is that the people who get to the other side and some commonalities with these people is that they decide to take the road less traveled, so to speak,
Mhm.
in the forums and all that, right? So they decide to start listening to their biology. What does their body need? They start honoring that.
Yeah.
They start changing their lifestyle and making the changes despite, like I was saying, all these things going on.
Right.
And as they start getting further and further down this path of healing that's happening, they can say, oh my gosh, look at how far I've come. But not only that, is that they realize there's hope.
Mm.
And then as they get that taste of hope,
Yeah.
they start realizing what it is they really wanted in life to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's like this beautiful thing. It's like a transformation that is happening
Hmm.
with this person. And they realize my dream has always been XYZ, fill in to be a coach. Like I have a client who's gotten back into being a baseball coach,
Yeah.
and doing that with kids. Loves it, loving his life.
Yeah.
Another one went back to be a teacher, always wanted to be a teacher, went back to school in her 40s to do that.
Yeah.
Another one wanted to travel, felt
Hmm.
like, she couldn't travel. Now she's traveling. So it's realizing that there's not only hope on the other side, there's life on the
Yeah.
other side, and you decide what that looks like
Right.
ultimately.
Right.
And when you're going through this the benzo withdrawal and this whole protracted or bind or whatever state you want to call it, I don't want to minimize that and say it's nothing, just keep living. Obviously it's something that people do have to go through. It's a suffering,
Yeah.
but it's just like gold being tried in the fire, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just like in order for that gold to become pure, it
Right.
has to go through the fire.
That's
And
right.
so I look at the person who's going through the benzo and they're in the midst of it and they're going, oh, and they're in their mind, they're the only ones and they're deep in the hole, right?
Yeah.
And it's like if they can just see a little bit of light and a
Right.
little bit of hope and get to that, they will come out of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also, I feel and I see that the harder they struggle and the harder it's like the more they're being tried in the fire and they
Yeah.
come out more
Yeah.
pure in the
Right.
end. And so I see it as the amount of level and suffering a person goes through, you get that much more success, recovery, hope in the end. And it's a very beautiful transformation that happens. And I think what's most beautiful is when they realize, I don't need you anymore,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, because I don't
Hmm.
want to have to hold your hand in
That's right.
life to get, you don't, at some point, you don't need me anymore. At some point, you won't need Dave anymore. At some point, you
Yeah.
won't need whoever you're seeing. And I think that is like the most beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Or when I say to them, you know what, I think what you're going through is life. And
Yeah.
you know what? What do you feel? How do you feel? And get them to start questioning, like,
Yeah.
do you think you need to keep seeing me? Or, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like,
Very
how about
true.
we
Yeah.
back this up a little bit instead of every week? Let's go a month. Let's see what
Yeah.
happens, and
Yeah.
let life happen. But so on the other side of this suffering, and you can call it torture, hell, whatever, fire is a purification process and is a
Mhm.
blooming success and life and hope that
Right.
you just have to believe it. And then you'll believe it more once you get through it. And you're just gonna
Yeah.
be like, that's what they were talking about. Oh my gosh, this is
Yeah.
amazing. The healing side of this is very amazing and transformative for sure.
Absolutely. And the idea that I had to wrap my head around, which has been said for thousands of years, is the idea that all the bad things are not really bad. They're just part of the process. We're talking almost like alchemical process that's happening here. So,
Mhm.
if you look back at your life and you can pick, two or three things that you say, this is the worst thing that happened to me. Okay, now take benzos off the table because it's still happening for many people. But
Mm.
like you think of those two things, let's say two things, and ask yourself what happened though? What came out of that? Oh, I had this horrible divorce. It was the worst thing in my life. I love this person so much. I begged God to change it. And when I was going through it, I was cursing God. Why would you torture me like this? Why you don't love me and the universe is against me? But then what happens? Then you find the next person, the right
Wow.
person. and you say, "Oh my God, I'm so glad that I mean, what was the alternative to stay in an unhappy relationship or something, right? Or a job or whatever the case may be." So it's like
Mhm.
whatever happens, if you can start to learn to accept it as like there is no good and bad, there's good bad and bad good almost. Like there's these two processes that are happening, and you can learn. It's a hard thing to wrap your head around because we come from a very dualistic society that teaches us no, it's either raining or it's sunshine, it's good or bad, windows
Mhm.
or waves. Like there's no normal that's why I love that kind of Taoist um meshing of the dualities, that the idea like a yin yang, there's black and white, but then there's white within the black and black within the white, this idea that these go hand in hand. And so that I think that makes if you look back on your life, no matter what it was, you can find like, wow, it really did forge me to be who I am.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of clients, especially that are either they're religious or they're spiritual, especially the religious ones, and they go, I want to be closer to God. I want to be closer to Christ. I say, this is what it looks like. This is
Yeah.
what it looks like. It's not riding a Ferrari on a sunny day while rainbows are bursting across the sky. That's actually you're probably further away from God at that point, almost,
Yeah.
right? It's like, this is the thing. If you really want it, you got to be forged in this. And then somehow in the forging, the light gets in the cracks, the light gets in, and then you are transformed. Then you go, oh my God, now I know what it means to love. Now
Yeah.
I know what it means to have faith. I didn't know what
Yeah.
that meant before. It was a throwaway word before. Now I know what faith really means,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, you know what it means to be prayerful in all things. You know what it
Mhm.
means to really lean on God, through these circumstances. And I am a Christian, and I do believe that we are not to be conformed to this world, like it says in Romans 12:8. Be ye not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may do that which is right and upholding up unto God. So
Right.
it's the transformation and the renewing of your mind is when you separate from the world.
Yeah.
That's where the transformation
Yeah.
is happening. That's what Paul is saying in that verse and in that whole chapter, is talking about the sanctification, the separation of you as a Christian.
Mhm.
And sometimes it takes something like a benzo withdrawal to
Yeah.
separate you from the world, to
Right.
get you down on your knees, to get you in that
Mhm.
relationship with the Lord, to get you just talking with him as you would your friend,
Right.
to
Right.
realize that
Right.
he is still there, even in your suffering, and
Right.
that he'll get you through to the other side. Absolutely. I do
Yeah.
believe that,
Yeah.
and patients who do have faith as a background, I love to draw on that because I know how powerful it is,
Yeah.
for
Right.
sure.
It is. I tell them, I say, you have a secret weapon in this fight. You may not realize this. And some of
Hmm.
them are struggling with their faith. And I say, well, sometimes I think that's because maybe you were being unfair to how you thought it was supposed to go. that
Hmm.
that having faith meant you were bulletproof or something. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that. And if you
No.
really want to be, it's like if you pray and say, God, please make me a better Christian, make me
Oh,
have a deeper compassion. I want to really feel things on a level I've never felt them before. Come on, hit me with it. How do I do it? And he says, okay, boom, tragedy. you know
yeah.
and you go, whoa, what are you doing? This is not what I asked for. I want to feel things. But this is how you feel. You
Yeah.
don't get to have that good marriage, perhaps, or that good relationship until you go through a couple bad ones sometimes. You have to
Hmm.
learn what it is to love through loss. And you got
Yeah.
to learn, the sweet is never as sweet without the sour. To put it in very simplest terms, you
Yeah.
need the sour, but we're all like, no, I don't want the sour. I just want the sweet. But I want the sweet to have contrast. Well, that's what the sour is. That's why it's
Hmm.
sweet. Without the sour, it loses its meaning.
Hmm.
So some people say, well, that's just maybe rationalizing. I don't think so at all. I think it's very, it's a core truth. But I think if you haven't experienced it, then maybe that's what it looks like. Like, well, you're just trying to make lemonade out of lemons. It's like, no, that's just not how it works.
Hmm.
So you're right. I mean, it's again, I think we're talking about the idea of like a transformative process here happening.
Yeah.
We've gone from like transforming the mind, and all of that to now like the spirit of this thing, the soul. if you will,
Absolutely.
right? And I'm so impressed with my clients that are, I've seen people that weren't religious become very spiritual through this
Hmm.
process. And I've
Yeah.
seen the ones that were religious have a renewed, deeper sense of faith and
Yeah.
say, God, before I was just trying to live what I was taught. Now I feel it. Now there's
Hmm.
a difference here. Now I don't need, now the teachings live inside me and I'm not
Hmm.
just sort of regurgitating them a little bit and trying to kind of dance on that line of being a good, virtuous person or something. You just go,
Yeah.
wow, now I get it now. Now I get suffering and I'm enlightened.
Absolutely. You start to empathize with suffering and even get a little taste of the suffering that Christ did for us,
Right.
and I mean
Yep.
it's certainly not to that extent, but you do get a taste of what suffering is when you go
Yeah.
through benzos, withdrawal and
So it's a good message for anyone listening. Embrace it in a way. Embrace,
Mhm.
don't run from it. And don't treat it like some curse or some arm that's rotting off of your body and needs to be severed or something. Like this
Mhm.
is this is, part of the big picture stuff, I think,
Yeah.
So embrace it if you can and see it as a profound journey of transformation. Then it has a new, renewed sense of purpose and meaning. And now, it's not just this horrible car accident you were in, but it's a vehicle
Yeah.
of transformation. And that, again, like I said, have faith. So my faith was, while I was going through this, was, it was like um, a fire burning inside you, and I
Mm.
had something telling me, I know it looks dark. You could feel this in a sense, like it's dark, but something's coming. Be patient, be righteous, keep your head up, walk through the fire. We're all going to walk through the fire, but how you walk through the fire is going to define you. You know,
Yep.
and I had this unscrappable faith that something was going to work out. I was scared. My limbic system was going, no, it's not. Horrible things are coming. Your head's going to fall off. And then there was this other voice saying, breathe. You'll see. You're going to do
Mhm.
something big will happen on the other side of this. Something profound will enter your life, or you'll have an opportunity. And I remember I was at the end of my taper and I was driving. I wasn't driving, actually. My friend was driving, doing exposure therapy out of town. We drove like 2 hours away. And that was a big deal for me. I was in the passenger
Mhm.
seat, like breathing and, holding on because this was way out of my comfort zone. And I remember just feeling like, I think things are going to be okay. And then it hit me. I want to write a book about this. I want to come back and give testimony. I knew then, had no
Mhm.
idea, 10 years later, I would be where I am, essentially flying a giant ship with 100 people in it and trying to get them across this giant river that I had almost
Yeah.
sunk in. And you go, God, man, then that's what faith is. Because I wish I could have known that like there was such a transformation and such goodness out there waiting for me. It would have made
Mhm.
it a lot easier. But again, that's where faith comes into play. So when you hear that voice
Yeah.
telling you, hey, I think it's going to be okay, listen to that voice and don't
Lean
listen to
in.
this. Lean away from the fear because that one's the
Mhm.
liar. That's the
Yeah.
lie, right?
Yeah, and the fear tends to dominate and tends to be
It is.
louder.
It's a
So you
louder
have to
voice.
listen to the still small voice. Yeah,
Yep. The fear
absolutely.
is definitely the louder, colorful,
Hmm.
decorative voice for sure. Yeah. So let me ask you, if you don't mind, and I don't want to get you in trouble here, but I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts? And I think we talked kind of loosely on this, but what are your thoughts on this term bind? And I think you and I said, you and I had a brief conversation on it, and it's another thing that I have a kind of love-hate relationship with because I think it signals something very important, and I
Hmm.
totally understand the different meanings behind it. But my problem with it has been that nobody can agree on what it means. I've heard everything from it's everything left when there's no other explanation, which I think is the best. That was from D.E.
Hmm.
Foster. I think that's the best definition. When you can't explain it through side effects, protracted withdrawal, um, paradoxical effect, right? All these other things that could happen, manifestations
Hmm.
of illnesses, pre-existing illnesses. What's left then is bind. And then I have but I'm finding that's a very small portion of the population in the benzo community that's saying that. In fact,
Yeah.
I've only really heard Dee Foster, Jennifer Swantowski, and maybe a handful of other people that said that. The rest of them are saying, Well, it's a more serious word that seems more official, that takes away the taboo of being, psych med harmed or being dependent. Because people think I'm an addict. And I
Hmm.
go, well, I totally relate to
Yeah, that
that
is
because,
true. Hmm.
I totally relate to that. When I first time I went to the
Yeah.
hospital, the night before I cut my dose in half, the doctors treated me like a drug addict. And, here I was going, a drug addicts get high. I don't even
Yeah.
get normal on my drug. You know what an
Yeah. It
insult
doesn't
it is
make
to tell me
sense.
that? So I get it, but my thing is like, hey, words matter. Words
Hmm.
matter. And we have, if you're talking about protracted withdrawal, we have words called protracted withdrawal. And
Hmm.
there's research, there's peer-reviewed research on this. You doctors
Yeah.
familiar, they teach this in textbooks. Um, and I just wonder if it doesn't create more of a challenge than it alleviates, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
the other thing I will say, and I'll shut up here, is that bind when I talk to my clients, the majority of the time, and I mean the mass majority, like 99% of the time, when they talk about bind, they think of it as this unpredictable, unique, rare kind of brain damage that could possibly be permanent. And they say things like, you know, you could fight your way off this drug, recover. It could be 5 years later. You could be living your best life symptom free, and then one day bind will hit you again. So not
Hmm.
only is it, some kind of anomaly of a brain damage, but it's this boogeyman that could just sort of reappear one day on you. And
Yeah, I
there's no
haven't
evidence
heard.
for this. There is
Yeah,
no
no,
evidence to any of this, right?
no. So what I understand of bind, and I have a video on it that I did too that, kind of bundles it up, but it is a cluster of symptoms. And how they came up with the nomenclature of bind, obviously is it's an acronym, benzo-induced neurological dysfunction.
Right,
And then what they did was collected a survey of, I wanted to say it was 1,300 people. So it was like the largest survey of people who took benzodiazepines. And then they wanted to see what people's symptoms were.
right,
So, and they just did like in the research, it's called qualitative research at this point. It's not really
right,
quantitative and it's not controlled. They went into a lot of different groups and forums that they had access to because this is the big community, the Alliance for
right.
Benzodiazepine Best Practices, Easing Anxiety, which is DFoster. So they're going into communities that are already, I would think,
Yeah,
biased or already like in an injured state,
right,
because they're in these communities. So they kind of spread the word that way for the survey, and then they got that amount of people in the survey, about 1,300.
right.
And then they qualitatively, meaning they looked at all the data and they found themes
Mm-hmm.
of what people were saying their
Right,
symptoms were. Now, when it comes to the terminology, they did find like symptoms that didn't really fit. Like, this isn't really post-acute withdrawal. Maybe some of it is, but there's these other symptoms that seem different than someone
right,
post-acute withdrawal that's in the literature. And there's like an overlap with side effects of
right,
medication, plus then withdrawal that the person's going through. So
right.
it was like they wanted something to encompass like this anomaly that people are
Yeah,
having this, because when someone goes to a provider and starts talking about this burning sensation on my skin, tinnitus,
yeah,
and neuropathies, which is part of the bind, doctors look at you like you have two heads. They either tag you as being hypochondriac, or
right,
they'll send you to neurology, who then will tag you as hypochondriac or something because there's nothing wrong with you.
right,
So they wanted the people who are suffering in this way to have a name for to call what they're experiencing, but also for providers who don't understand anything about benzo withdrawal pause. There's people who don't even understand what pause is.
right,
I mean,
right,
and that's a protracted acute withdrawal, which,
right.
a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of research on it and there's been for years, but there's
Right.
still providers out there who don't even know what that is.
Sure.
A lot of people don't know that benzo withdrawal can last as long as it does, and that you need to taper as slow as you need to, or else,
Right.
this could be a problem, right? And so it was a way to kind of get the information out there, categorize it in these themes, and then, come up with a name for it.
Sure.
Within that paper, too, they also found a lot of other things like percentages of people who actually become suicidal and depressed during this
Right.
process, and they lose their quality of life,
Right.
and those kinds of things, which are from long-term use. So they took, and there was a variety of like short term, long term, like, and that's how they saw the long term people, the people who have been using benzos for more than a year, is what they found in
Right.
that study, were the ones who had these types of symptoms specifically.
Right.
And when they did their calculations, it was like 20% of
Right.
people experienced these cluster of symptoms that they then termed bind,
Sure.
that were different and were outside of what the literature is explaining. And so it's a way to kind of give it a name so that people aren't getting gaslit, so that
Right.
you can show your provider, hey, it is something that's real.
Right. Right.
When it comes to the science, though, it's a qualitative study. So when you look at the hierarchy of studies,
Right.
qualitative studies are at the bottom.
Sure.
They're not, it's not like, a systematic controlled kind of, randomized controlled type of
Right.
a
Right.
thing, or with a bunch of other studies or anything like that. Or, um, it was a sample group of people who were already like in
Right.
the benzo world, in the benzo community. So
Right.
so the population, you could argue too, that they chose was very selective. It
Oh,
wasn't like looking at the
massively.
general millions of people who take
Yeah.
benzos, so we don't know if
Yeah.
that 20% number could be skewed, because they took it from a community, that a population that was already in these forums looking for help. So there was already something going on with these people.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a selection bias, as
It
far
is a
as the
huge
sample
problem.
goes.
It's a huge problem. Let me tell you. I mean, I did my dissertation. If I would, I did my dissertation on personality influence on burnout amongst correctional officers. And if I said, oh, I sampled all these people from a group on Facebook called Burnout Correctional Officers Burned Out, they would laugh and turn that down in a second. They go, you don't have a study. You have a completely wildly biased study. Let me guess, your sample found high numbers of burnout? Yes. How'd you know? Because you got them from you know what I mean? So there
Mhm.
alone, it's like, that's not, it's great to point towards something and to
Mhm.
extrapolate information and ideas that then other research might be able to build off of. But as a study, it's very weak. I mean, it's almost laughable. I'm sorry if that
Mhm.
sounds a certain way to certain people, but in terms of studies, it's like that's so biased that you can't extrapolate and say 20% of people in a support group based on that. You know what I mean? It's the data is not going to be taken serious. I'd be really shocked to see if that was taken seriously on a big level as like this is going to validate bind, because to me it just opens up more questions. So like you were talking about symptoms. What symptom what symptom would be bind?
Mhm.
Like, can you give me one? You said something there. I was
The
gonna ask you
burning, the tingling neuropathies,
that.
like a lot of the neurological symptoms they highlighted as
Sure.
being symptoms of bind, but there are also other symptoms in there that
Right.
overlap.
Right. But how do you, but again, all those symptoms you can find in people with PTSD, somatic symptoms,
Yeah.
insomnia. You know how many people with insomnia will say, I'll just have lightning shocks in my body sometimes,
Mhm.
or
Or
jolts or
brain
jerks
zaps.
or
That was
brain
one that was.
zaps and
Mhm.
things
Mhm.
crashing in my head,
Mhm.
tingling and twitches and vibrations and all of this. And if you looked at that, if you had a group that was called, insomnia-induced neurological dysfunction, and then we sampled those people, then I guess we can make an argument for neurological dysfunction from insomnia. And if
Mhm.
that's the case, okay, I'm with you. We can call it that, but I still think it might be better to, I just think it's better to explore what are we really looking at, try to get deeper. I agree with what you're saying. I like the idea that it's a first I want to say I support the research just in the fact that it's drawing light on this thing and it's trying to get
Yes.
closer to a phenomenon that we wanted to differentiate from just coming off benzos, what we would call as a normal level of quote unquote protracted.
Hmm.
Um, so I agree with that. I'm just, I just feel like, it leaves a lot to the imagination, and then the
Yeah.
connotation of it, like I said, the idea that you have this weird boogeyman neurological problem that could just reemerge 3 years later or 5 years later. I think that's where it starts to really start to have a problem. And then and it kind of echoes back to the beginning of our conversation. We were saying like people that are spooked to have like magnesium. Like to me,
Mm.
bind is central to
Mhm.
all of that. It is central to
Mhm.
all of that. I can't take, how many times I've heard this? I can't take magnesium, I have bind. I can't take vitamin D, I have bind. I can't do that.
Mm.
It becomes this thing that's like this all encompassing. And then, I talk to so many people that will report bind and they're like, it's just like, that's just protracted what you're describing.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Or maybe that's insomnia or so I just have a tough time wrapping my head around what exactly it is and then questioning does it
Yeah.
do more good than harm? And I've never seen many doctors embrace it. I think when you come into this word
Yeah.
that you created, the doctors go, who, what? Bind? No. You know what I mean? So,
But I
uh,
think the protracted withdrawal, I think too, the other thing is that that can be from antidepressants, it can be
sure.
from alcohol, it can be from other
Right.
drugs. And they wanted something specific to benzodiazepines. So it was like
Right.
looking at it like for the benzo community to have something that was specific to them that looked at that population alone
So again,
versus,
right. But again,
yeah.
we're talking about benzo induced, we're talking about benzo protracted withdrawal.
Right.
So we're
It's
just
like
renaming it.
yeah, when you look at it and you strip it all down, it is, like that.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is when you look at they have like a graph or a table of like where bind
Yeah.
fits, and it actually shows that it could be like part of withdrawal, protracted, and so it's like this curve,
Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
it can start with while you're withdrawing. So you're
Right.
still on
Right.
the medication because protracted is when you're off of the medication.
Right.
So they're saying that you could be in this kind of protracted state even while on the medication.
Which,
And then, of course, after you're
yeah.
off the medication, that's the definition of protracted is
Right.
is the fact that you're done the taper and now you're in this protracted state. But
Right.
I think leaving all of the jargon aside,
Right.
um, people who I think the point is that people who are in benzo withdrawal are suffering to an
Sure.
extent that I think is beyond what the other literature suggests.
Right.
And,
I
and
and I
I,
totally empathize. Look, I
yeah, so
was
I
those
think
guys.
that's what that was coming from, where that was
I
coming from.
totally understand, and I was that guy. So
Hmm.
if I have a dog in the fight, I'm one of those people that can make that argument. But I
Hmm.
also know that there's a lot of other features going on there, like
Hmm.
unchecked rumination, insomnia, depression, trauma. I mean, complex trauma, health anxiety. How many clients have health anxiety? It's
Yeah.
got to be 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10 of my clients or something. I mean, it goes
Hmm.
from mild to full blown psychogenic effect. I mean,
Hmm.
full blown, they're going to the ER, they're on other meds, they're having procedures done, like all kinds of
Oh
madness
yeah.
that start to happen. So I just feel like we would get somewhere maybe more constructive if we started to just peel back the layers and say, what are we really talking about here? As
Hmm.
I see, bind is such a umbrella term. It's just a big old
Yeah, it's the
umbrella term.
beginning of something, and
Yeah,
and it needs to be studied further. And I agree, and I believe they mentioned that in the paper too about, this is just the beginning, and they did recognize those limitations as well of
yeah,
the study, and would like other people to kind of go in because they're limited on what they can do,
right. Oh, I
financially
agree
and
with that. Yeah,
to tap into a broader audience.
yeah,
So I think that they're hoping that this opens the eyes of other researchers out there and other people out
right,
there that have access to larger
right,
sample sizes and even a broader, more general sample size. to study this and validate it because it's not validated. That's clear.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, I like I said, I have a love-hate relationship with it. Like, oh, generally I say if you, just put me to it and say, do you support it? Yes, I will support it because I think it points close enough to something that needs to be addressed, right? I
Mhm.
just argue with the connotations and the definitions of it, which again, no one can agree. I mean, to even call it
Mhm.
you can get in protracted while in withdrawal seems a little strange to me. Like but
Mhm.
it's protracted after you're just having acute withdrawal. And
Mhm.
also as someone that's been, working so long with so many people, I've never seen anybody in a state of what I would consider what they thought bind was, meaning someone came to me with these bizarre symptoms and it has to be just a neurological, like brain damage or something. And I go, well, hold on, let's see. And we start to work on holistic things and then things start to get better. So I'm like, I
Mhm.
don't know. Is it brain damage doesn't work that way?
Yeah, it's more
Diabetes
of like
doesn't
a
work that way,
traumatic
right?
response, I think, like you were saying
Yeah,
earlier.
right. That's what I think it is. I think we're talking
Mhm.
about like a whole new level of like trauma response in the nervous system. So
Mhm.
maybe I think at the end it comes down to semantics and to some level, but you know, more to your point, like that's what I want to do. I want to build off of that and say, okay,
Mhm.
yes, there is some phenomenon. Let's put a bunch of arrows pointing to this phenomenon. We can call it bind or anything else. In fact,
Right.
look, there's similar experiences with people coming off opioids, and
Yeah.
we could call it OIND, opioid
Hmm.
induced neurological function. So, okay, what are we pointing at?
Yeah.
Is it a
What is
cluster
actually
of
happening?
what's happening? Is it trauma? Is it a cluster of symptoms? Is it a limbic system sliding in and out of fight or flight state? Is it
Hmm.
is it just receptor damage? What the hell is it? There's so many, As I just worry from someone, especially that spends such a long time in academia, probably like yourself, right? You spend a lot of time doing research and stuff. You know how they talk, you know their language. And
Yeah.
and I don't think people realize how rigid and tough it is. And I just thought, man, I don't know if it's you better get on the page with a definition, and if it's an umbrella term for a cluster, then that's what you should say.
Hmm.
And I watch all these different coaches and I see how they use the term, and I'm like, everybody's using it differently. This person's talking about it just as protracted. This person saying, well, it takes the taboo out of being called an addict, which I'm sympathetic for, but I say, why don't just fight
Hmm.
for what we're fighting for? Why don't we
Hmm.
just fight to have the taboo taking out of these meds? That's what I would fight for. Then to change
Right.
it and call it something else, it's still this. The doctors are not going to get on board with it, I don't think. I
Yeah,
mean,
they still
maybe,
they don't
you know,
understand pause, the post-acute withdrawal. They still don't understand, obviously the
yes,
benzo. So
but you can
it's
print that out and bring that to them.
hmm.
Doctors understand research. They don't understand opinions, anecdotal experiences, nothing else. They want to see peer reviewed from the University of California study on boom, 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 And
Hmm.
you could bring that. And if they go, are you familiar with protracted? And they go, no. Here's an article. And they don't have to read it. They just look at the abstract and see
Hmm.
what university or what it was and the findings. And they go, oh, okay, now I hear you. I
Hmm.
wasn't familiar with this, which blows my mind. How are you not familiar with that?
Yeah, a
That's
lot of
crazy. It's a whole
doctors
other
aren't.
topic, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Hmm.
Yeah. All right. I'll jump off this topic because I know people are wanting to choke me because this is like one of these hills I die on in the Benzo community. Just shut up, coach, and just join the team. I'm like, I'm not trying to be a contrarian or something. I worry about, us doing more harm than good sometimes with this. And,
Hmm.
I had D Foster on, I think a couple times. And I was even on his. And I mean, he was on the page. I said the same things to him, and he was very much on the same page of like, yeah, we really do need to be responsible about how we use this term and what it's pointing to and what the definition is and all of that. I think D took a
Hmm.
lot of responsibility in that, and he was even saying openly, like a message to people, this is what it is. Don't confuse it. If you're just in benzo withdrawal, you're not in bind, guys. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean you have brain damage and you won't heal. And bind is
Yeah.
not something it's not the boogeyman. It's not Freddy Krueger that 3 years later is gonna pop back up in your brain and all the receptors fall apart again. That's
No,
not a
yeah. I,
phenomenon,
I haven't heard that one, but yeah, people can latch on to something. It goes back to the fear and then create this something
Oh,
bigger with
absolutely.
that fear.
Absolutely. That's how it works, right? And so if you believe that you have a type of brain damage that is so unpredictable and that can affect all these other areas where you can't
Mm,
take vitamin D, you can't eat spinach and all of this, you can't go out check the mailbox because of the sunlight. I mean, the way this
mm,
goes, you can literally your brain can create pathways to those things and they can become real problems. And
mm,
then they become a confirmation bias because you say, see, I told you, I walked out there, I checked the mailbox, and for the last 2 weeks I've been depressed and I've been completely bedbound. Don't tell
mhm.
me checking the mail didn't have something to do with it. It's like, oh, it absolutely did, just not in the way that you think it did. It
Right.
wasn't because the vitamin D you got from the sunlight in 38 seconds walking to the mailbox overloaded your
Hmm.
brain like some powerful dose of Zoloft or something. That's not what
Yeah.
happened. But your
Yeah.
fear became a contagion and you're primed and ready to be influenced. And I think that's the people get frustrated again with me with some of the things I say, but it's coming from a good place. It's coming from
Mhm.
I'm really trying to look out for people and I'm trying to protect them and say, be careful. Don't give in to the fear and the hysteria of all this stuff because
Mhm.
there's a danger in there that's so profound. There's a danger in there where, you could really end up sick because you're stuck in that place. And it's one of my most difficult challenges with a new client is when they are stuck in that place and you're
Yeah.
trying to break those walls down. You're trying to give them hope and you're trying to get them to try things that'll be helpful, but they just can't hear you. They're
No,
just
yeah.
frozen in that I have brain damage. It is what it
Hmm.
is. Did you hear about so and so? Did you see so and so? So and so was 5 years off and it came back. The bear came back for him one day, and it's like, what do you do with that? You know, what do you do with that? Right?
Yeah, you gotta, start small, like you were saying, and establish the trust, and then, have them do small things,
Right.
to slowly build that back up,
Right.
and tell them to stop going to these communities and forums that are feeding them this information, because it it has to be drilled that they're different. Everyone's different. Everyone's path is going to be
Right.
different.
Right.
That's how I, talk to my clients about
Yeah.
like these
Yeah.
these issues. Is like, well, maybe that person who took vitamin D, maybe their need was different than yours, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Sure. Sure.
that
Sure.
when you look at these stories that, they took magnesium and this happened. Well, their biologies we don't know. Your
Mm.
biology is right in front of you. You know what I mean? When we're
Yeah.
going over
Absolutely.
labs with someone, like, we got to face this here, and we can start with nutrition, and let's start
Mm.
doing that. But that's only going to get you so far,
Yeah.
especially if you're super depleted. But it's a
Right.
way, like you said, to test it out and see what happens, so
Right.
to speak.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're totally right. I was asking like a hypothetical in a sense of like, what do you do?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I
What do we
mean?
do? Yeah.
But I do everything you're saying. I mean, you build a
Yeah.
great relationship. You hope that they trust you. You try to
Hmm.
provide as much evidence. And, sometimes I will refer to studies and stuff with my clients and say, look at this and look at that, or look at
Hmm.
this person. And then the other thing I hammer all the time with them is if you really understood how subjective this ride was, it doesn't even make sense to listen to anybody else because their story is not your story. Well,
Yeah.
John and Benzo, such and such group, he took magnesium. So what? That's John. That's not you. Well, how did you
Hmm.
do with magnesium? Why did really good? Then why aren't you taking it?
Hmm.
You're not taking it because somebody else had a react. That's not. Come on. That's not healthy.
Yeah.
And so you try to appeal to their sense of rationality and all of that, yeah, but it is still frustrating, I mean, mostly I'm
It's
very
a
successful with
roadblock.
it, but it is a roadblock, yeah.
It's
And it's
definitely a
it's a
roadblock.
dangerous roadblock where you're looking at
Hmm.
someone going, I can help you. I really believe I can help. I'm not saying I have the miracle cure, but I think I can get you moving forward if you'll let me, but you're not letting me. You're really
Hmm.
tying my hands. And I find some of them get so, wrapped up in the fear and the rumination that really what you and I might become to them is kind of a rumination drinking buddy. They just want to
Hmm.
kind of vent and be told scary things. They don't know that they want to be told it, but they want to hear it and they want to kind of just, we want to talk about the problem, but not the solutions.
They want to be
Y-
validated.
Yeah, validated. Well, it's more than that. I think it's fear fueling fear. Like
Hmm.
one thing to just be validated and say, hey, because they get a lot of that. We know, I mean, who's not validated at this point in the Benzo community, right? Like
Hmm.
this is a big community with a lot of loud voices now. I think it was hard for me to be validated because I couldn't find anybody that, I was just being gaslit at every turn. But when you find the community, you start to be validated. But I'm talking about that neurotic part
Mm.
I talk about rumination like um, being like, you have a flat tire, you pull off to the side of the road, you check the tire, you check the trunk for the jack, but you just keep running the algorithm of checking. You never get around to changing the tire. You just keep
Mm.
trying, well, let me check again, and let me check again, and let me check again. And then it evolves to a point, what they call brooding style rumination, where then you start to ask questions that there's no answers to. You go, how did this tire get flat? How long, what if I never changed the tire? What if somebody hits me on the side of the road while I'm changing the tire, right? So we get pulled into that mechanism, and that's what we want to do. So then when they come to us, they almost want that. They kind of don't realize that they're in that gravity almost of that thing. They want us
Mhm.
to kind of, can we just talk about, and so sometimes they get really frustrated when you try to provide solutions to things. It's like,
Mhm.
I don't want, as someone here, like you said, I want you to get better and then leave. Not that I don't love talking to these people and I love having,
Right.
and it's bittersweet, in fact. When they do leave, you feel
Hmm.
kind of heartbroken. You're like, man, it's like losing a friend. But you're
Yeah.
happy that like and you feel validated as a coach or a therapist or a provider or a practitioner. You're like, I did something. I helped that
Yeah.
person across that river. You
Yep.
kind of don't want to be talking to them 5 years later and then be in the same place that they were when they met you, because then you start to feel like, I'm failing you. I
Yeah.
can't help you. You know what I mean? So it is something beautiful, but at the same time, I have clients that, and maybe you haven't had this experience. I don't know if this is what I'm saying is making sense, but I have a lot of clients where I have to say, hey, look, we've talked about that for 10 or 15 minutes. Let's start talking about something else. I know let's go back to, okay, we'll do for 5 or 10 minutes. Benzo's suck and it's awful and it's so horrible and these symptoms and we'll do that, and I'll pat you and hold you and hug you and tell you it's going to be okay. Now let's start talking about, well, no, hold on. We're going to go back to it again. We're going to go back to it again. And we're going to go back
Oh
to it
yeah.
again. And it's like, and I think they get frustrated with me sometimes because I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take your money and just be a paid ruminator with you. It,
Right. And it's
it's
hard to get them
unethical
out
for
of
me.
that circumstantial
Yeah.
thinking, and you're trying to, you ask them one question to try to get to, like,
Yeah.
so that they can find the solution, and they
Yeah.
just jump on, well, this happened, and and then they
Yeah.
go, and then
Yeah.
that's, so you're like, well, can we go back to the question?
Yeah. And then they'll
Yeah.
say something like, "Ah, I just wish there was something I could do." And I'm like, you start ripping your hair out. You're like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell you what to do, but you're not listening. You keep taking it back to this is classical rumination stuff. We're talking about
Yeah.
the tire. We're not changing it.
Yep. Yep.
John had a flat tire. He was flat for side of the road for 4 years. Oh my God, why are we talking about John
Yeah. Oh
and his
yeah.
tire? This is not productive. I
Yeah.
get it, but I had one client. Well, I've had many clients that done this where I tried to change it and they just yelled at me. They shouted at me. Just tell me I'm going to be okay. And I'm like, whoa, okay. Now it's all out in the open. This is what you want. I'll tell
Yeah.
you again, you're going to be okay, but I'd rather help you be okay than to just keep telling you're going to be okay. Because,
And just be a sounding board. Yeah.
yeah, because there's actually a danger in that. And a
Mhm.
lot of coaches I find do that. They're just really, and it makes sense because we're trained to a sense to be very empathic listeners and support. And
Mhm.
they just do that. But what they don't realize is like the obsession, whether it's I talked about the obsession answer seeking phase or the obsession reassurance phase.
Mhm.
It's enabling at some point. And if you never
Yeah.
learn how to, one client, I remember 50 times in one conversation, 1 hour, I had told them they're going to be okay. And finally at the end I said, what did she go, just tell me I'm going to be okay. And I go, but I already did, like 50 times I've said you're going to be okay. And she's like, just tell me again. I said, but what did I say? You said it's all normal and to breathe and everything's going to be okay. I said, there you go. But just say it.
Yeah.
But you just said what I said. So but they want, so I go, no, see, now we're verging into a psychological problem. This is not just about validating or being
Hmm.
nurturing. You are getting clung on to something. And if you don't learn to hear and then and settle and yourself, you will become codependent on someone constantly giving you that. And eventually it won't be enough. That
Yeah.
once a day telling you you're going to be okay won't be enough. And by the way, I am a huge supporter of constant validation and
Yeah.
constant reassurance. I think every day, if you or someone that has a loved one going through this, every day tell them they're going to be okay. Every single
Yeah.
day, not every hour, not every
Right.
5 minutes. Now that's verging on a kind of almost obsessive compulsive problem,
Hmm. That's what
and
happens. The
yeah,
OCD. Hmm.
yep. And then you start to think, well, what's the harm in that? The harm is like you become like a drinking buddy for this person that's trying
Hmm.
to beat alcoholism and they don't even really know they have a problem and you just keep pouring the shots. So at some point you have to, there's a fine line between giving all that reassurance and then helping that person establish self-soothing and emotional regulation for themselves. You got to help them
Yes.
do that. And sometimes it's a tough process. Just tell them I'm going to be okay, damn it, Giselle. I'll pay you
Hmm.
double. Just tell me I'm going to be okay again. You're like,
Yeah.
but, but I'd rather teach you how to hear it first, because then you can do it for yourself. In fact, your
Absolutely.
future depends on it. That's how
Yeah.
important that what I'm talking about is. Your
Yeah.
whole future exists rests upon this
I
ability.
like to flip that question when they ask me, am I going to be okay?
Yeah,
Well, how do you think you're going to be? Do you think you're going to be okay?
yeah, right.
And flip it back on them
Right,
so that
right.
after everything we just talked about, what do you think?
That's right, right, right.
Get them to think about, oh yeah, I guess so. But and then
Yeah.
I just want to hear it from you. I get that too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
tough, but it's almost some ways feels like tough love a little bit. But there's a gentleness to it. You don't just come into it and go, I'm not telling you anything. You have to, there's a gentle
Right.
nursing effect, and then you kind of taper off of it. You almost taper off of the reassurance a little bit, and you
Yes.
help them.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll start a call and just at the beginning say, I just want to tell you you're going to be okay and you're going to heal. Okay, let's get on with it. Oh,
Yeah.
damn, you got that out of the way. Hold on, wait a minute. How did you know my secret question that I was going to ask you 42 times,
Yeah.
Um, let me ask you another question. What do you think about antidepressant use in this? And again, I hate to hit you. I told you if you come on this podcast, it's going to go good or bad for you. I don't want to make you
That's
public
okay.
enemy number two. The community and attitudes are changing a lot, of course, but oh my God, there's still so much fundamentality and fear, and like you said, the
Yeah.
purists of you cannot take an antidepressant. I mean, there's even some coaches out there saying you won't heal if you're on an antidepressant. You
Yeah.
won't heal if you don't come off the antidepressant, or if, you can never go back on an antidepressant. And I think
Yeah.
that is
That's
wildly unethical.
dangerous. It's
It's dangerous
dangerous.
and it's wildly unethical. And I hope anyone hearing me, and I don't even care if I lose subscribers over this, like, it's a hill I'll die on. It is one of those hills. Like the bind, I'm not going to die on that hill. You know,
Mhm.
I'm too much in agreement with that. I'm just semantical issues. This one I will die on, in a sense, because I've seen people that could have been helped who harmed themselves because they didn't believe that it was possible to even explore those options, or they were coming off of an antidepressant at someone's advice when they shouldn't have been, or they should have stopped, and they just kept trying to push through because they were told that real healing is on the other side of that. Right? What do you think of that?
Yeah, so that's a slippery slope, and when I'm working with someone who's coming off an antidepressant or wants to come off an antidepressant, I ask why. And if it's because someone told me or I heard it was bad, I go
Right,
back to, well, that's not really a good reason
right,
because we have to go back to why were you on it to begin with
right.
and then figure out that problem.
Hmm.
So what I mean is that we have to, I always say, look under the hood and see what's going on because the way that I work with patients and what I strongly believe to be true is that mental health symptoms are oftentimes a result of issues that are happening either medically or
Yeah,
nutritionally speaking. And when they're not resolved and we just keep giving you a medication, we can mask it, but it gets worse and worse, and then the medicine stops working. So
sure.
if we just start working on taking away the medicine because you're not feeling good and someone told you that this was bad, but we didn't fix what was going on, what was actually going on underneath, you are setting yourself up to feel worse And perhaps, like some people will take their life when they're coming off of these
Mm.
medications because they never fix the problem under what was going on underneath.
Right.
Now, some people will say to me, well, it could also be genetic, or it could also be things that are out of your control. Yes, there's a small percentage of people that it'll
Right.
be like this quote unquote genetics, but genetics isn't like there's one gene for depression, and if you have
Sure.
it, you have it. It's epigenetic. So you can have
Right.
a bunch of different factors in your genes that make you more susceptible when the environment is just right with
Right.
trauma and life stressors, etc.
Mhm.
Then yeah, then now those genes are expressing themselves due to the stress that was put on the DNA or methylation cycle that's supposed to repair and fix your cells every single day.
Right.
So, yes, that can be a factor. Now, when I work with someone who's on a benzodiazepine and they want to come off of it, I have a couple of patients that are on both a benzo and an antidepressant, and they insist on coming off both. And I don't agree with that.
Right.
Because number one, we have to figure out when you're coming off of one, if you come off both, we don't know what's causing what and how, when we should slow down on one versus the other. It becomes very convoluted. Um, and number two is that, a lot of times we need the antidepressant in place when you're coming off the benzodiazepine to help support at least that serotonin system or something like that. I do strongly believe that.
Right.
And so we can't just, get rid of everything at once.
Right.
And then some people come to me and they want to wait to have the benzo for last. That's fine. And others, they've already started the benzo and I say, okay, leave the antidepressant alone. So I've done it
Yeah.
both ways.
You're
But
right.
before I even taper, I like to fix what's going on underneath first
Yeah. Yeah.
because those things matter. And the
Right.
things that I have found have been profound, like someone with complete iron overload, not
Right.
deficiency, overload. So they need blood, like to donate their blood to get rid of the iron overload. But iron overload causes pain in joints. It causes tingling and neurological symptoms. It
Right.
causes significant depression mixed with anxiety. So
Right.
endless, this fatigue, this restlessness, this kind of battling back and forth because your body's starving for oxygen, even though it's an overload.
Right.
And so, what does that sound like? That sounds like
Right.
bind, what we
Yes.
just
Right.
talked about, right? No,
Right.
you weren't in bind, you were in iron overload.
Right.
Then iron deficiency is the other end of that spectrum, which looks a lot like anxiety with, remember, we need iron to circulate oxygen throughout our body, and our brain is the greediest organ.
Right.
So if you're not giving your body those proper nutrients, then yeah, obviously you're going to be very, very anxious. It's like starving for
Right.
air,
Right.
and getting
Right.
oxygen into your cells. So your brain is going to suffer. And so, yeah, I do believe that there is a place for antidepressants, and even to, and people will say I'm crazy or this is nutso. Don't listen to her, but I don't care because I've done it and it's been successful with using a little bit of Seroquel for someone
Mhm.
to help them sleep because their
Right.
insomnia is so bad,
Right.
and in some patients, maybe it caused them to help them sleep, and then they got adapted to it later on and they were scared to go up. So we just stopped it. But at least they kind of helped to reset their
Right.
circadian rhythm. So it's not something that we lean on forever. It's just like a tool in the toolbox.
Sure.
And so, yes, I like to utilize medications in that way. Now, it's Seroquel isn't the first thing I jump to, just because there's a lot of issues, long-term use of Seroquel. It's an antipsychotic, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But, maybe hydroxyzine could be a
Right.
place to start with something like that. Very
Right.
benign kind of medication. When you're looking at the scheme of things, I know not all, there's risks to every medication, but I'm just saying in the grand
Right.
scheme of things, maybe hydroxyzine would be a better choice if you're scared of an
Right.
antidepressant or
Or
something like
trazodone
that.
maybe or something like that. Yeah.
Trazodone, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Some people can tolerate trazodone fairly well.
Mhm.
Zoloft if they're having significant depression, or fluoxetine, which is Prozac. And the thing is too, we as clinicians also um, a role here in following guidelines too. Like, I can't ignore that there are evidence-based guidelines out there that say when someone is this depressed and they're having suicidal ideation, like, this is what I need to do.
Right.
Because then, if God forbid that person does commit suicide, guess who they're going to look at?
Good point.
Why didn't you provide them with an antidepressant, or at least give
Right.
them that choice?
Very good point, by the way.
Because, as a clinician, I have to follow
Yep.
practical guidelines, and I have to at least tell you, the patient, what your options are.
Right.
So, I have to present that to you.
That's right.
And if I don't, then I'm doing myself a disservice, and I'm doing you a disservice, because I've just eliminated a potential tool that could
Right.
actually help you if you're suicidal or severely depressed. So
Right.
we have to bring that into perspective, into what is the severity of this, um, and what does conventional medicine say? We have to always bring that up, right? And when
Right.
we're talking to people, and then, where the person is, like, do we feel like they need to do that right now, or maybe we can try these other things? Because that's
Right.
what I'll say. If someone's mildly depressed, they're not suicidal, etc., and I'll say, look, these are the conventional medications we could start to help to treat this. However, I prefer to, let's go look under the hood. Let's see what's going on. Let's see if we can support your nutrients with
Yeah.
diet. Maybe you need supplements. I won't know until I look, and
Yeah.
then go from there. And a lot of people will prefer to do the nutraceuticals, the nutrition, because, they feel they've already been injured by a medication. They don't want to add more. So I
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah.
But and that's fine. But if that's not enough, there is a point where you have to say, okay, we've been doing this now for a few months, but you're getting worse. The clinician needs to take a step back and say, wait a minute, I've used all of my tools to help this person, and they're not getting better. I see they're
Mhm.
getting worse. So I need to circle back to conventional treatment and at
Right.
least leverage it for some time.
Sure.
So it doesn't have to be a forever thing, but for some people it is a forever thing, and they're completely fine. And
Yeah.
that's another thing I want to say, is that um, there's a lot of stigma out there in our community. I say our community, but you know what I'm talking about, like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
benzo community, or whatnot, about being on the medications,
Right.
and oh, you can't have a fruitful life on the medications.
Mm.
But that's not true.
Right.
um I help people with tapering and deprescribing. That is, a huge part of my practice. But some patients, it's just getting them down to one or two medications, and they're doing great, and we
Sure.
stay there,
Hmm.
and that's fine too.
Right.
So we need to get that across as well, that guess what? If you need to be on 0.25 of Klonopin from 3 milligrams of Klonopin every day, but you're doing great at 0.25, that's a win in my
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
And you have your life back, and you're
Yeah.
feeling better. You know what? Why
Yeah.
not?
Right. Right.
Why not stay at 0.25?
Right.
Or, you needed to be on Lexapro, and you're doing great on Lexapro, and you want to stay on Lexapro while, after you tapered, and guess what? You're feeling
Mhm.
good there, who am I to try to talk you out of that?
Right. Great
So
point.
so it
Yeah.
is a very personal choice, but at the same time, a clinician needs to know when to step in, especially when it comes to suicidality. That is an emergency. It's a clinical emergency.
That's
And
right.
if you don't step in and tell the person, like, hey, I know where you stand as far as being pure or whatever it is, like you're against the medications, I get it. But it is a tool we can use to help get you out of the
Yeah.
suicidality. At least let's try it.
Right.
So that way, then we can work on these other things, that then we can work on getting through this. And
Right.
perhaps later on you can come off of it. But as far as saying all medications are bad, and I'm not in that boat because I've seen medications transform people and help people just the same way as deprescribing does,
Right.
and getting off
Right.
of all medication. But I also have learned that deprescribing doesn't necessarily mean getting off all your medication.
Sure.
Some people do really well
Great point.
when they're
Yeah.
on five and you get them down to two or one and
Yeah.
they're fine. Then that's okay.
I totally agree. I love everything you said there. And we both are kind of like you said, look under the hood people, right? So
Mhm.
your specialty is advanced nurse practitioner, right?
Mhm.
Right. That's what you're advanced
Psychiatric nurse practitioner with
psychiatric
a
nurse.
yeah, with a certification in integrative mental health. Mhm.
Right. So, it makes total sense for you to say, let's do some blood work. Let's look at what's going on a metabolic level and all of this and see if there can't we. And that's what we're taught, by the way, for anyone listening, we're taught to rule out things first, right?
Yeah.
Even as a person with a background in clinical psychology, they taught the first thing they tell us, rule out everything else.
Hmm.
Before you diagnose them with depression, see if even if their testosterone or estrogen is off or something like
Yeah.
that, or are they low in vitamin D or B12 or all these type of
Hmm.
things. You start ruling out things just on a like you do, but I don't have the ability to, from my seat to like to really run those kind of panels, let alone to
Hmm.
fully understand them. But I do it more so in under the umbrella of psychology, life stuff. So that's
Yeah.
why when I talk to someone, the first thing I do is say, tell me about your childhood. I thought we were talking about
Yeah.
benzos. And I say, but I want to get a big picture of you. What
Hmm.
was your childhood like? Were you anxious as a child? Were your parents anxious? Did they drink? Did they split up when
Hmm.
you were young? Did you get on it? What was high school like? Were you picked
Yeah.
on? Were you had high self-esteem? Did some traumatic event happen? What about college? Did you have a terrible breakup and end up on a benzo or an antidepressant? And that's always the example I use. And many times they go, I did. I
Hmm.
did have a terrible breakup in college. How did you know? And I ended up on an antidepressant for a short period of time or a benzo for, I had some trouble sleeping during my exams or something like that.
Hmm.
So I like to build up from the ground up, from the biology to the earliest experiences to how did we get here? And then I know when
Yeah.
they come to me, they just want to jump right into the here and now. But I'm
Yeah.
like, all these other things matter. So if I know you're
Absolutely.
someone maybe who was abused as a kid, who developed health anxieties and OCD as a manifestation or repercussion of that trauma, and then you didn't get a lot of therapy or holistic skills or almost none. A lot of times it's almost none,
Hmm.
and that matters. So now when I know, like, say you have health anxiety, and I'm starting to look at this situation with a broader sense of vision of this isn't just something we treat as a symptom of benzos. This is something this
Yes.
person has battled with their entire life. Now
Exactly.
I know their wound, and I might have ideas of how to help them heal that wound, but it also informs me on things of like where things could go off where you can go off the track sometimes in this. And if you
Hmm.
don't know that, excuse me, you'll think that, oh, it's all benzos again.
Hmm.
It's like, no. And sometimes, they'll leave things out and they'll forget, oh, I forgot to tell you I was molested as a kid. And you go, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's big. That is a huge
Yeah.
problem. Or, I'm having all this insomnia
Absolutely.
and benzos and I'll take anytime I hear insomnia, I take it very serious because it can exacerbate all the other stuff. But a lot of
Absolutely.
times, more times than not, when they have profound insomnia, I go, did you ever have this before? Yeah, a few years ago, 10 years ago, after I had my
Hmm.
first son or something. Yes, okay.
Hmm.
So this was a learned thing. This was
A
kind of,
pattern.
yeah, it was festering there. It was something sitting in dormant maybe sometimes. So like you, the same thing. I want to see what's under the hood there, what's going on. And
Yeah.
then, of course, because you got to address those things. I say coming off benzos sometimes is the easier part. Staying off
Hmm.
benzos. And then someone said, why would I ever want to go back on benzos? I didn't say wanting to return to benzos. I
Hmm.
said staying off benzos because sometimes you don't feel you have a choice. You just
Hmm.
go, it's fire extinguisher or fire. What the hell do I do? I don't
Yeah.
want to use the fire extinguisher, the benzo again, but I can't sit here and burn either. So I'm big on like find out what's going on there and let's work on that thing because that has to run parallel with everything else. Like you
A
said about the
hundred
idea
percent.
of maybe you do need an antidepressant for the rest of your life or a low grade benzo or something like that. Totally, yeah, that might be the case. But even then, work on all this other stuff
A
that
hundred
the
percent.
parallel, right? Because that's
Mhm.
going to give you the best chance, A, to make that med be as impactful as it could be,
Yep.
and B, you might surprise yourself 5, 10 years down the road, and you might actually be able to come off that antidepressant because
Yep.
you rewired your brain and your whole perspective and belief and everything
Yeah.
for the last several years, learning to, and that's what therapy is. That's what good therapy is. And it's a whole nother
Hmm.
topic that I won't bore anyone with, but we've gotten away from real therapy, so to speak, and everything's been stripped down. We want it now. We want CBT. We want 8 sessions of CBT. And it's
Hmm.
like, look, it took you 30 years to get here.
Yeah.
Why don't we, you can't just fix that in 8 weeks of learning to ignore your symptoms. Like that's one thing to manage symptoms. But what if your symptoms are coming from an anxiety because when you were a kid, you were abused and always told that you weren't worth anything?
Mm.
CBT just addresses this. It's like treating a rash with cream. You're not getting
Hmm.
to the virus or to the deeper cause of it, right? So we're never getting to the core that you have low self-esteem because of trauma in your childhood, but we're going to keep treating the symptoms of anxiety in the here and now. And I just think it's futile, it's you got to go back.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people, that is their root cause is
Yeah,
trauma.
right.
And a lot of people, and we can't ignore that trauma gets stored in the body. Vessel Vanderkolk, the body keeps the score. Very good book.
Right.
If you haven't read it out there,
Oh yeah.
that very good book to get to understand this concept. And that can make any type of withdrawal from any medication worse. So
Yeah.
you have to treat the underlying root cause because what you were taught essentially is after the breakup, which could have been a traumatic event for you, or maybe you had compounding trauma, which led to this complex picture. But then, oh, someone said, let's give you some Xanax because, you're a nervous wreck.
Yeah.
So instead of learning at that moment in time how to deal with the trauma that has been stored in your body is now manifesting as all these symptoms,
Yeah.
you trained your brain to take a pill.
Right.
And so that is now the answer, the pill, the quick fix.
Right.
And so meanwhile, the trauma's, festering underneath there, right? And you're
Yeah.
squishing it and squishing it and squishing it, never dealing with it until, like I said, a while back, becomes this monster in the room, right?
Yeah.
That's the fear, trauma acts just same system, same area, limbic, amygdala, hypothalamus, all of that.
Right.
And so we have to look at this as a complete clinical picture. So it's not just the nutrients or medical conditions that I find, but it is also exactly what Dave is
Yeah.
saying with the trauma. And you got to understand that. And that's why a lot of, my clients, I'll say, I really strongly recommend that you go through the counseling and the therapy for XYZ. And a lot of it is trauma,
Right.
whatever the trauma is that you find someone who specializes it, or I'll help them find someone to get them through.
Yeah.
Because if we keep ignoring that and just try to taper regardless, even if I fix those nutrients and whatever else is going on, that's still lingering in the background. That's still gonna, be an issue we have to settle.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the interesting about trauma too is there's different schools of thought about treating it, and
Mm-hmm.
a big piece of it, I kind of go back to the Jungian approach. When Jung said it was treating trauma was a kind of a matter of learning to let it go.
Mm.
And you're right, it's in the body, but it has a circular, it's a circular problem. It fuels itself, creates more
Yeah.
trauma, more symptomology. So that's a piece of it to get in there, and that's what some of these new therapies are trying to do to kind of like the eye focusing and things like that to
Yeah.
process that and sort of release it out of the body. But again, if you don't get back to the core, what is causing it to hang on? Because sometimes it's not just the body. The body is its own mechanism, but if it's
Mm-hmm.
something like a
Memory.
rape survivor who internalized the damage and says, "I blame myself,"
Mm-hmm.
you can do all the eye focusing things you want in a sense that I mean, maybe it could. would heal the trauma completely. But I think it creates an uphill battle in a sense because
Mhm.
we're kind of dealing with the physiology a bit, but not the belief. That's the sticking point. And the hope is, well, maybe if we
Yeah.
bring down the physiology enough, then it'll free the mind to be able to see things differently. And that's where sometimes meds and things can be very effective. Going back to
Hmm.
like an antidepressant, it's like it may not heal the depression from a level of like where it started necessarily, but it might give you enough perspective to unlock you, at
Hmm.
least, at the very least, you can unlock that. So mental health is weird like that. It's strange how it works sometimes. Sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, like you could take someone who's perfectly quote unquote healthy and, make them depressive. There was a pill you can give them to make them depressed. And the depression by features of its own kind of pathology will then make them have a lower sense of view, sense of self-worth. Everything starts to
Hmm.
get painted with that dark brush again. And then they
Yeah.
start to ruminate and they start to become anxious and they start to less sleep and they become hypervigilant. And then their brain starts looking for something to latch on to.
Yeah.
So it was like, my mother was too tough on me as a kid. And then that becomes the sticking point. And then, and then it's like, but was that really a sticking point? Or was that some kind of manifestation in itself that, another thing Jung said was something like, neurosis is always an excuse for legitimate suffering.
Mm.
Again, it's
Hmm.
like your brain will create something out of the suffering. It's not enough just to sit there and go, I feel depressed. I'm feeling
Yeah.
blue. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling stressed. I'm worried. It's like
Hmm.
your brain then goes about what? We need
Yeah.
something. We need something to to chew on, like a dog with a bone.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, this thinking out loud there. I want to move on because I know we've been on for a while and I want to keep you all day. I have some questions from some students.
Sure.
But before we get to that, I did have one or two more questions. One, what and we don't have to get into like the nitty and gritty of it, but what elements, just in your experience, would you say if you were giving advice to someone, what are the most powerful elements of a person's recovery, do you think?
Most powerful elements
Yeah, yeah.
in like why someone recovers or to
Yeah, like
get
what
them
you've
through to
seen.
recovery.
Yeah, like what you've seen when you look at the people that have recovered the best, like if there was a theme or something that you might have noticed in those people, like what kind of things can you give a testament to?
Yeah, well, I'd say the people that recover, I guess you could say the best or have a that shorter path to recovery are ones that believe in the hope that is
Yeah,
out there and aren't stuck in the suffering.
yeah,
They don't allow the suffering to define them. And, like I mentioned before, they're the ones that don't have a bias,
yeah.
to what all this is. They're kind of coming in blindly. They just kind of heard about, they saw my one video, want to know how to do it.
Right.
And then they just go through, the process. They
Yeah.
don't question, they don't get stuck in that pattern of I need to Google search every little thing, what's going on, and that whole pattern of the health anxiety piece, because that's how the health anxiety develops, is when you're
Right.
constantly searching for answers and then you start taking every little symptom, over analyzing it, and
Right.
then thinking that there's something wrong with you.
Right.
So it's the ones that trust the most and believe in the healing process and believe that our bodies have the ability to heal
Right.
despite what they're going through and the suffering they're going through.
Right.
And they also have support. I have to say that's super important too. They're not alone. They have
Yeah.
family that's
Right.
supporting them and helping them through this.
Yeah.
The ones that I see do the best, they have very supportive families, and oftentimes the families are coming in on the calls and things like that, which I think is great to
Yeah.
get them in on the conversation as well.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Kind of rare sometimes. You wish more
Mhm.
family or spouses would get involved, but I always say, look, if, when I always smile when I have like a client whose wife or husband gets on the call, and I was like, that's an angel right there. That's a
Yeah,
great
they want
person
to know
right
what's
there.
going on and they
Yeah.
they want to understand, and that's
Yeah.
wonderful,
Yeah.
and
Oftentimes we
and
don't do that. We kind of sit from the side and go, oh, we'll just watch from the sidelines. It's like, help them out,
Mhm.
get in the trenches with them a little bit. You're
Yeah, and
totally right.
another thing I wanted to say though, quick, as a tip, if you're stuck in that state, like I was talking about, that fear mongering kind of state that we've been talking about, that sometimes certain forums can get you stuck in, but you have a family member that's supporting you and really wants you to get better, you can actually leverage that family member to give you the medication and you not know. So it helps
Yes.
eliminate the the fear bias that you may have.
Yeah.
So you don't know where you're at on the taper, because a lot of times not knowing those things and just trusting in what the person that's supporting your husband, your
Yeah.
wife, your family, whatever, son, daughter, that's
Yeah.
whoever's there helping you. If you can, trust in them and then trust in your provider, trust in your coach, that is another good way to help someone get through that, stuck in that fear state or that suggestive state of
Right.
everything's hurt is hurting them.
That's such a great point, and it made me smile because I immediately thought of a certain number of clients I've had that did just that. And I remember this two of them in particular, and both of them had a situation. One was a man and his wife was, running his taper. Another one was a woman and her husband was running it. And both of them had come off their meds, and their husband, the woman, her husband did something so cool. He didn't even tell her for like 3 months. He was just giving her water, you know. And then so 3 months go by, and she finally goes, "Hey, I know I told you I don't want to, get involved where I'm at, but where am I? I feel like I thought I was getting real close to the end." And he goes, "You've been off for 3 months." Well, guess what I got? Can you imagine? Call crisis. Oh my God. Oh, I'm in again. This is why I say I have a love and hate. I'm in bind. I go, what are you talking about? What's going on? I've been off. Yeah, and she explains this thing. I said, you were doing beautifully until he told you. You were off the drug for 3 months and you were healing and you were doing great work. And you see, just knowing that you were off, your mind went, oh my God, and now it fell apart. But
Yeah,
but that was an easy ledge to walk her back off of because she
right.
got that concept
Got
and
to
she
see.
yeah, she
Yeah.
goes, "You're totally right. It is my mind freaking out, and I'm going to get control." And then she was great, and that was
Hmm.
pretty much, we stopped working with each other shortly after because she was doing great. And I said,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, this is the perfect scenario for coming off benzos if you can have this because it takes off all the apprehension, all the fixation,
Yep.
and the rumination and all of that the scrutiny of looking at this damn drug and the doses and the vials and the whole thing that goes with it. And the same
Hmm.
thing that happened with another guy that I had. He came off for a month or two, and his wife told him the same thing. You've been off, and but he was a little more like, ah, okay. And he just sort of rode the wave out of that. Whereas the other one kind
Yeah.
of went, oh my God, what does that mean? Doesn't mean nothing. It means good things. It means great things
Yeah.
for you. You took that out. So I know not everyone can do that, but if you can do that, I'll tell you. But
Yeah. If you're stuck in that mindset of fear and like kind of, feeling like every single drop
yeah,
is like a panic,
yeah,
you're stuck there, consider it. Consider having, if you have a supportive, family
yeah,
member doing it for you. So
right.
it helps to really eliminate that mind piece, that,
Really does.
that suggestive fear and all of that.
And it sucks because benzos themselves are a source of trauma for so many people. So it's
Hmm.
almost like having a gun trauma, but you have to keep using the gun every day to
Yeah.
get, you know what I mean? It's like it's very not it's not a great design
Yeah.
for the to be taking the thing and fixating on the thing that's actually causing you trauma. So, I love what Coach Daniel's book on he says set it and forget it. Set the alarm and forget it. And then his approach to sleep. And I was like,
Hmm.
it's one of those titles like wish I would have thought of that. But I love the idea of like removing benzos out of the equation as much as possible.
Yeah.
But coach, isn't that delusional? Isn't that just like trying to, look at things with rose-colored glasses? It goes, so what?
Yeah.
Just do it. Take it out
Yeah.
of there. It's too traumatic. It's too much risk to look at it. As long as you're on the straight and narrow and you're doing everything else. By the way, you should be focusing on all the other things anyway. If all day you're
Hmm.
focusing on the benzo and it's your bigger thing isn't How do I manage symptoms? How do I build skill sets? How do I build neuroplasticity? How's my diet? How's my nutrition? I mean, these are the questions that should always come first. I can think of
Yep.
10 things that come first before the benzo, which is not even it's not even a question. It's just rumination. It's just
Hmm.
fixation on this fear of the bear sitting in the damn room,
Yeah,
Well, great point
absolutely.
there. I hope maybe we'll inspire some people to like try that, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I know we're going long. I think I'm going to move on to end it with a few questions with from my students. And like I said, a
Hmm.
lot of them were very familiar with you, and they were excited when I told them I
Yeah.
was in a good interview today. So number one is what foods can help or hurt with withdrawal? Is there anything you see there? Foods that can help or hurt withdrawal?
Yeah, it's individual. And like I said in the beginning, with the suggestions and people, if you're into these forums and you start reading that this minute or this food is going to hurt me and that food is going to hurt me, and then you start eating it, or you start staying away from it and eating it, it can hurt you. What I do have to say though is that the reason why it's personal is because some people are reacting to food for different reasons.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the benzo. So, and what I mean by that is if you do an IgG food panel um, test to look at the sensitivities that you're having, you'll get an idea of the foods you're reacting to. And the reason you can be reacting to those foods can be many different things. Like um, a lot of times it's dysbiosis in the gut, where you have more gram-negative bacteria, and it causes a situation called leaky gut. And so now you're reacting to proteins that kind of pass through the membrane that weren't supposed to, because a lot of our immune system is actually 80% in our gut. And so it's starting to react.
Mm.
So you would want to heal the gut and then slowly start reintroducing these foods back in, because once you heal the gut and you heal that barrier, you should be able to start tolerating these foods. Then you have another group of people who for whatever reason, a lot of times it's stress response, and you may see this in the benzo community, but something called mast cell activation syndrome, which is just, it's one of those terms like bind,
Right,
because
right,
your mast cells are supposed to activate when you have a stress response or inflammation or something like that going on, but it gets over exaggerated, and so
right,
you have a lot of histamine. So foods that are high in histamine, and that's where you'll get the people like that eat avocados and bananas and foods like that are high in histamine can have reactions.
right,
So if that is the case, then that's a whole different, approach, as far as we have to lower the histamine response. A lot of it's lowering stress and working on the limbic system. And
right.
then also making sure there aren't any gut markers, because sometimes that can be a downstream effect of long-term leaky gut left alone. So
Right.
you oftentimes will see other symptoms like skin reactions and things of that nature if you're having something like that,
Right.
along with mental health symptoms like anxiety, brain fog, that can convolute this whole picture of withdrawal. So yeah, you want to look at those things, but it's all individual. And so just because you see someone say as they react to this, and this when they're in withdrawal doesn't mean you will.
Right.
You may actually have a very healthy gut and everything be fine and not have any reactions at all to any food. And it could just be all in your mind. So you want to,
Right.
if you
True.
feel like you are reacting to food, you do want to look into it a little bit further,
Right.
because you don't want to continue it causing that inflammatory response. And
Right.
so some people, if they can't afford the testing, you can just do an elimination diet and start with very bland foods and then go from there, with starting to reintroduce foods and then see, if you're having reactions.
What kind of reactions when if you have a client that's taking eating like you said avocado or bananas and have a histamine response, what kind of things are they looking out for there? What are the
So with
telltale
that,
signs?
you get a lot of gut symptoms, bloating, gas, abdominal pain, but you'll
Right.
also have flare-ups of like a rash,
Right.
will exert like some kind of symptom outwards of excess histamine. Flushing is common as well. And then some people will get anxiety
Yeah.
as well with increased histamine. So
Right.
which obviously convolutes the whole picture of a withdrawal type of
Right.
symptomology.
Right. It's to me, it's such a slippery slope when we get into the histamine stuff sometimes because, like you,
Yeah.
I look at the things you named in that order, right?
Mhm.
And and a lot of times what I find is when they talk about histamines, they're not talking about any of that. They're just talking about anxiety. They don't have
Mhm.
the rash or the bloatingness or anything else. And I go, okay,
Mhm.
but that's a slippery slope now because
Yeah.
it could be food phobias you're developing. I mean, we're talking about a condition that breeds wildly phobias in every damn thing. You have
Yep.
clients that sponge bathe in the sink because they're phobic of the shower. You're right. I mean, you
Yeah.
realize how it works, on how acute it can be like that. Then I'm always like, be careful with that because I've had clients that got themselves all the way to the point where they're eating 3 pieces of food a day, right?
Yeah,
And
and that's
clients that,
dangerous.
right, they're
That
boiling
is
or they're,
dangerous because they're whittling away, and then
yeah,
you're also now depleting yourself of essential nutrients
right,
that you need for healing. So
right,
that's where it can be very, very, very dangerous when you get to that point. And so
yeah,
you still have you've got to build, the system back. And a lot of times, um, therapy, obviously, if this is more of a suggestive type of a thing and you're having a phobia, you really need to get into therapy and start with exposures, to
right, right,
gradually, if this is a true, response, then build your immune system up. Take stuff that, I like mega IgG. It's a powder that you mix, every day, and it helps. It's bovine
yeah,
serum immunoglobulins, so it's going to build up your immune system to help
mm,
bring that histamine down.
right,
And help reduce your reactions. And you could do stuff like Mega Guard, which is going to help
yeah.
rebuild your stomach and make it stronger, and those types of things.
If they have a histamine response, would you recommend them trying an antihistamine like Benadryl or Zyrtec or something, or would that
Yeah,
even not be effective?
hydroxyzine can be very
Hydroxyzine.
helpful. I like hydroxyzine just because it also is very anxiolytic.
Yeah,
So yeah, if I'm looking at someone who has that, I will, recommend that. Some people don't like it because it makes them too sedated,
yeah, right. I
which
was one of
some
those
people,
people.
that's a desirable
Yeah,
response,
yeah,
especially at night.
yeah,
But yeah, you could use then something like a Zyrtec, or
yeah,
it's just cimetidine, or you could do
yeah,
something like um Benadryl. It would probably be too sedating.
yeah,
But some clients don't mind that, and they want to have that type of sedation as
sure,
well. But that'll help to bring it down, but you still have to get to the root cause, and a lot of it is building up on the immune system and figure out where did it go awry.
yeah,
And some, like I said, most people it's the gut, but there's others who have exposures to toxins like mold and chemicals and
sure,
things like that kind of made this happen. So
right.
investigating why, I think, is important, because you're just masking it if you're just going to take an antihistamine.
True. Yeah. And also, if you do take an antihistamine and you're worried about the drowsiness, I know there's non-drowsy Zyrtec and things like that that may
Yeah.
get around
Hmm.
that, you know.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I've worked with a lot of people with this issue, and I've seen it go both ways where it's been really histamine, and when we get on kind of an antihistamine or a low histamine or anti-inflammatory diet, and dietary changes completely resolve the issue. Then I've seen those same people 3 months later, their bodies just for whatever reason completely reacting differently to all these things, where
Hmm.
they couldn't have an avocado 3 months ago, now suddenly they can. So I
Hmm.
tell people all the time, like things change,
Your body
remember
is
that.
healing. Hmm.
You're right. And yeah, things change. So just because you couldn't do this before, maybe you can now, so
Yeah.
that changes. But yeah, I've had a couple clients that got up on such an elimination diet that they were like boiling and freezing chicken and only eating peas or something, something strange. And I'm like, you can't live on that. They're measuring their food out and they're whittling away,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's tragic. And at that point, I'm like, I don't know. I would take the histamine. I mean, I would take the histamine issues over, starving yourself at this point. I mean,
Right.
figure it
Right.
out, But I've had a lot of luck with the graded exposures with food. We start real
Hmm.
small. For those that do have food phobias, I mean, and I had food phobias. I mean, so like I said, it happens so easy. I don't care how
Hmm.
that's the thing about benzos is like it doesn't matter if you're scientific, you can be the most rational person on the planet. When that limbic
Hmm.
system comes knocking and some shouting, you'll become irrational. You will start to
Yeah.
go, I can't, again, I can't, this green shirt is something, it's something triggering me. I can't wear green anymore. And suddenly you're like, that makes sense to you, you know?
Yeah.
But I've had success in graded exposure with people where it was a food phobia, and we would just do small things. Like I remember one client, she was so happy when she had her first slice of pizza again. And
Hmm.
I got it. I was like, that was a big deal for her. I mean, that was a huge deal. She's like, I ate a piece of pizza and I didn't freak out, you know? And I was like,
Yeah, that
yay,
is a
you didn't
big
react, you
deal.
know? It's so
Yeah.
cool. But, you know, we started with like a little nibble, a little piece of this, a little piece of cheese, a little bite or two, you know, and I said, whether it's physiology and biology and all this stuff, and then your limbic system just learning to welcome it. I think so much of this is the limbic system learning to welcome something new again. Because if you
Yeah.
think about how this thing operates, when you have a crisis and you're in danger, it wants predictability. It wants
Hmm.
everything to be predictable. If a bear chases you into a cave and you are now in the cave for a day and the limbic system says, okay, in this dark, quiet, you know, it reads the environment and everything, says, I think we're okay here. It doesn't want anything different. It doesn't want any noise, any changes of lighting or new objects or new foods or new stimulus. Anything outside becomes a potential risk and it will react in fear. And then we
Yeah.
double down on the risk that we took because we think it's a symptom of the physiology reacting, but it's not. It's more like, no, you have this like I call it I say the limbic system has massive trust issues, you know, or
Yeah.
it's like this helicopter parent or something. It's like
No, that's
it just
true. That's a
hovers
good
over you.
way
It's like you
to,
can't do anything,
hmm
right? But
and you got to
there's a lot of
little
wiggle.
by little, increase your tolerance.
Yeah, I think graded exposure is key in everything, right? Even if you're
Hmm.
going to change over to a vegan diet, let's say, and you're going to have great results with that, you don't do that overnight, you know. It's a
Mm-mm.
graded, slow transitional process, one for your body to adapt and your mind to adapt to that. Because, you know,
Hmm.
a sudden dietary change, if it's too big, can be really, it hits you hard, you know, and that can, when you're already
Yeah.
sensitive, push you right over the edge. But also, again, your brain needs to kind of get used to it, needs to start saying, okay, eating that's better and avoiding that's good, that's safe, you know. I find great exposure in everything, almost literally almost everything seems to be very effective in benzo
Hmm.
withdrawal. Next question. What are your thoughts on GABA supplements?
Well, GABA supplements can help some people. GABA, the supplement itself, there's a lot of speculation on whether or not it crosses the blood-brain barrier. Um, but we do have GABA receptors peripherally.
Right,
So what I mean by that is that when you take a GABA supplement, it may not be doing anything in the brain,
right,
but it could be doing something peripherally that could signal to the brain that you're calm. For instance, when your muscles start to relax and
right,
you're instead of being tight and tense, they start to
right,
loosen. That is then a signal back to the brain saying, hey, we don't have to be tense, anxious, and stressed. Our body is relaxing.
right,
So it may not directly cross the blood-brain barrier, but indirectly can affect that signaling. And so
right,
for some people can be very effective, but it's subtle for most people. And people who are
right,
going through benzo withdrawal oftentimes have such a height in anxiety that it may not seem like it's doing anything at all. So they give up on it. And then
right,
you have others, they'll react to it. They say it makes them, go the other way because we're now acting on GABA receptors, even though you're not directly acting on them.
right,
Similarly, L-theanine is also another one that has some downstream effects to work on GABA.
right,
And you can take both of these things sublingually, to help and can have really good benefits. So I see for most people in the benzo withdrawal state can actually tolerate the low doses of L-theanine and GABA,
yeah,
but whether or not, like, meaning it's not going to flip them and cause a reaction, but the level of response is very varied, meaning you get, I took it, it didn't do anything, so it
right,
didn't cause any, or I took it, maybe it helped a little bit,
Right.
and then others like it really helped. It's what they needed to go to sleep,
Sure.
what they needed to calm down. So the responses are varied, and I think it's also going to the degree of benzo withdrawal that you're in, on how you will respond to it is
Mm.
what I'm seeing in
Right.
the patients that I treat. And the ones who are having these reactions, I think, are more in that fear. They look at the list, it's on the list, so
Right.
they're going to react to it.
Yeah.
Um, I think more that is more the case than anything, because there are some studies that show that you can actually help benzo withdrawal by creating this like kind of GABA bridge, it's called,
Yeah.
to
Right.
help support those GABA receptors while you're coming off.
Sure.
Um,
Right. Right.
yeah.
And right. And that's the idea, right? Like I've even had clients when I say, you know what increases GABA tremendously is mindfulness meditation.
Hmm.
It really can, they've done so many studies. I mean, if you want to go see some incredible studies, just go to like Google Scholar and then type in, mindfulness, anything, yoga,
Yeah.
mindfulness, meditation, effect on anxiety, on trauma, on depression, and look at the studies. I mean, they've done brain scans,
Yeah,
functional
I
MRI
did a
brain scans,
video
and
that
it's,
showed the brain scan
yeah,
changes for mindfulness were amazing. Yeah.
it's really impressive.
Hmm.
I'm of the mind in the belief that, and I have a lot of experience with like Zen Buddhism and things of that nature, more as like I see it as the world's oldest psychotherapy more than like a
Hmm.
religion. It was never intended to be a religion. It's a whole nother topic. But you know, I I believe the idea is that our natural state for the most part is peace and love. And
Hmm.
there's a certain vibration that we're supposed to be at. And the neurosis, whether it's rumination, trauma, anxiety, insomnia, whatever it is, depression, it pulls us away. It puts a blanket between us and that state of things. And so when you look at meditation, you go, well, why is that breeding neuroplasticity? I think because it's not that it's breeding in like a supplement that's adding something. It's eliminating the thing that's reducing, right?
Hmm.
So that's more what it's doing. And then your brain can go back to the state. Like people don't understand that neuroplasticity is happening every moment.
Yeah.
You have self-guided neuroplasticity and just sort of neuroplasticity that exists based on your environment, your experience with the world around you. That's how it works. Your brain's alive and moving and growing and adapting constantly to everything. It's like a fish in the
Absolutely.
fishbowl, right? It's
Hmm.
like it can only get as big as that tank will allow it, so to speak. So I think, that's how I think it's key, that when you start to, meditate, that's what it's actually doing. It's getting all the things that are reducing out of the way and letting you be right here, because unless being right here is a breeding ground for GABA, okay, great. Then that's what's going on here.
Hmm.
But I have had clients say like, "Oh wait, you just triggered me. You said that meditating increases GABA. I'm trying to get a voice. I can't have any GABA." I go, "No, you
Yeah.
can have GABA. You want GABA. Like you said, you need that bridge, and GABA is not the enemy
No,
here.
yeah,
It's
we need GABA. Yeah,
right,
it's a
right.
yeah, because you're when you're withdrawing, your glutamate becomes a dominating,
Yeah,
neurotransmitter because GABA has been inhibited for so long in your own brain because of the
right,
medication supplying it.
right,
So, yeah, we need something to help because when you can't leave glutamate unchecked,
right.
so we do need GABA. So the
Yeah,
people who fear these types of things, I really work on them with vagus nerve,
hmm,
and I don't say, hey, we're going to stimulate GABA. We're going to stimulate the vagus nerve to work on parasympathetic, and you know what I
right,
mean? Because I know that that's going to trigger them if I
right.
tell them this is working on GABA, but it's another way around it.
Yeah,
But yeah, working on vagus nerve, mindfulness,
hmm,
the deep breathing, which hits vagus nerve, but also, what oxygen does to the cells and helps
sure.
to reduce inflammation and those kinds of things. We can't get away of how that can help
Yeah, yeah,
heal and improve, the GABA as
yeah.
well.
What do you thought that makes me think of something here? What do you think about the oxygen therapies that are coming out now, where people
I
increase
find
in
them
oxygen?
interesting. I've had a couple of clients like look into it.
Yeah.
One who's tried a couple of sessions but didn't do, I think it was supposed to be 16 sessions, I think was the
Right.
total. He only did two, and then it was like because it was far away, he had to drive a couple
Yeah.
hours, and so he decided not to complete it, and it was very expensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but, I do understand the hypothesis behind it as far as, oxygen is very healing for ourselves. And when we are going through any type of stress, we produce reactive oxygen species or like free radicals,
Yeah.
which are damaging. And that's where like antioxidants come into play, right? To help to bind those free radicals and clear them out.
Right.
But that whole system can get hijacked, so to speak, when you're going through something like withdrawal. And then
Yeah.
you can get into this state, biologically speaking, of constant oxidative stress.
Right.
And so, with that, you can test for that to see how high your oxidative stress is, or a couple markers to show if this is happening to you. But, someone who utilizes oxygen therapy, I believe it would be very healing for them,
Right.
because you're working on something that on a cellular level,
Yeah.
and helping to give your body a fighting chance
Yeah.
to now function properly, detox properly, because when you're in that state of high oxidative stress, your other systems like detox and things like that tend to not function as well. So now your ability to clear out toxins and things like that is going to be limited, because your
Yeah.
body's trying to focus on the free radical damage and
Right.
those types of things that are going on, and clear that out, versus say your withdrawal and clearance of your benzo,
Yeah.
or if you're living in a moldy environment. I mean, this goes for a lot of different things.
Right. Right.
But benzos, is your body, you need your liver to clear that out.
Yeah. I've got a lot of friends into a lot of, I don't want to say new age, but newer things that are coming out like that, everything from hormonal replacement to stem cell therapy, which I have a sneaking suspicion stem cell infusions could be a massive game changer for a lot of people in benzos, because it speeds up the body's regenerative process, right? And
Yeah.
it kind of goes where it needs to be, and has this regenerative effect. And that's a whole other topic, but I would love to see where that goes, because I
Mhm.
have a sneaking suspicion it could be a real powerful weapon, so to speak, or agent for
Yeah.
recovery.
Yeah,
Um,
anything that's going to speed up, oxidatives, or get rid of oxidative stress and damage caused by that, is going
right,
to be healing for people in multiple states, including
right.
that benzo withdrawal state.
What about those oxygen little? You can get little oxygen cans and stuff online. And I've had friends that would inhale them and use them throughout the day a couple times, and I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, just on that level, if you can't afford the expensive treatments, would someone
Yeah.
benefit from just having more oxygen? Maybe.
It's a possibility. It's going to be short, because the oxygen treatments are duration specific based on, what it is you're trying to target.
Yeah.
Um, there's oxygen bars in California and stuff
Right.
like that, and people get quote unquote high, because of the
Yeah.
extra oxygen
Yeah.
that's being delivered.
Okay.
So there might be that kind of effect. So perhaps you might get some, but I think it might be limited
Yeah.
in
Okay.
in the long-term healing effects that could provide.
Yeah.
Because it
I've never
sounds
been.
like you have to do multiple treatments, and then the duration of
Right.
treatments
It's a good
is
point.
also
Yeah.
a factor.
Yeah. I got a friend. I kind of tried to tell him something similar, and he's like, he walks around all day hitting hitting this can, and he's like, it's doing all these things, and I'm like, all right, I don't know. I don't know enough to tell you you're wrong, but okay. And I have a couple friends that I think it was in Tampa. They have an oxygen bar, or they had one.
Mm,
I remember I never went, but I had a bunch of friends that kept going and raving about this. I'm like, what is this? You go to a bar with oxygen? Isn't oxygen in every bar? I don't, okay.
right. Yeah, it's delivering it straight up room, the room
Yeah.
air or whatever.
But they say something help it happens. Okay, next question. Should benzos only be prescribed for 2 to 4 weeks maximum?
That's what um we're supposed to only prescribe them 2 to 4 weeks. That's, typically how they're supposed to be prescribed to start.
Right.
But is that clinically relevant? Like, does that really happen in clinical practice? No, because
Right.
someone gets, caught up in that dependent state. But then you also have to ask the question, what are you giving the benzo for?
Right.
Because there's some people who can't tolerate the anti-epileptic drugs.
Right.
So they do have to be on a benzo long term because otherwise they'll go into status epilepticus.
Right.
You know,
Good point. Yeah.
there are procedures they can do. There's vagus nerve stimulators that can be used as well to avoid that. And oftentimes patients will prefer to do something like that instead of, but those are the outliers.
Right.
And then you'll hear people, in the community say, well, I've been on a benzo, for this long and nothing's ever happened. And that's okay too. Like I mentioned earlier, if it's something that's helping you, not hurting you, that's
Yeah.
great. But I believe strongly that if you can build skills to decrease anxiety and panic attacks,
Yeah.
that is optimally what you should do versus relying on the pill.
Right.
And, when we're talking about anxiety and panic attacks here, which is the majority of use for benzos, that
Yep.
you leverage that and only use the benzo to help you learn the skills. So yeah, 2 to 4 weeks working with the therapist a couple times a week can
Right.
help you to learn the skills and leverage the skills of the vagus nerve, mindfulness, etc.,
Right.
to lower your anxiety and lower your panic so that way you won't need the benzo. That
Right.
is ideally the best way to do it.
I like what you said. I think you had a video, skills before pills. That's a good.
Yeah.
If you
Mhm.
write a book, you got to use that. That's a great title.
Yeah.
A great title, skills before pills.
Yeah.
What if someone says, well, hold on. Earlier we were talking about what if someone just did really well on a benzo, maybe they were older or something. Is there an argument for them to stay on like maybe a low dose of Klonopin if they're getting a therapeutic value, or do we revert back to the prescription protocol limitations, which are no, no, that's almost
No, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that person that you're talking about, the elderly type of person, at that point, if they're doing fine and there's no, like, it's not hurting them, okay, we have
right,
to make that clear too, because we have risk versus benefit, and that's where we have to weigh it out.
right,
And in case in point, I actually am taking care of a 93-year-old who is on 1 milligram of Ativan twice a day. Um, and he's had panic disorder all his life. He started in his 20s. I am
right.
not tapering him off of his Ativan. He's doing fine.
There
He
you go.
walks with
I
a
agree.
walker. He's not cognitively impaired. We do the cognitive test on him every 6 months.
Right,
So, I am watching him and monitoring for these things, but he actually lives like almost 2 hours away from the office, and he has his brother drive him to see me. Even though he doesn't have to see me in person every time, he doesn't understand how to use the Zoom stuff.
yeah,
Even though you try to show him, whatever.
yeah,
He prefers to see me in person, that's fine. But his doctors were trying to take him off of it because they thought that he's too old to be on a
yeah,
benzo, and
yeah,
it's on the Beers criteria.
yeah,
And so he went into significant withdrawal in the hospital and ended up in the hospital for some time and
yeah,
did not tolerate it well. And he's like, they're killing me, and he's,
yeah,
like I said, he's 93 and is completely with it. Yeah, he
yeah,
walks with a walker, but he walks just fine. And
yeah.
he lives with his brother, his younger brother, who, is there watching him, caring for him as well.
Right.
So yeah, case in point,
Yeah.
I would never taper that guy unless, something happens where I feel like he's having adverse effects of the benzo and it's no longer helping him.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I've had clients, a handful where I've had to kind of say, listen, I don't make it a practice at all to tell anyone what to do. It's not my job.
Hmm.
It's not it's unethical. It's not even, it doesn't fit with my internal compass to tell people what to do. But when you have someone that's in their 80s and they go, I've been on this drug for 30 years, and you know the hell they're going through, you kind of go, maybe not come off of it, right? I mean, and I wouldn't, well, that's not fair. I wouldn't say don't come off it. What I have said is, are you prepared for the potential last years if you have to struggle? I mean, what is it? Does it mean that much to you? And some say, yeah,
Right.
I'd rather die off the drug and very anxious or not sleeping than to be on the damn drug. And you can't
Yeah, some
argue with
people
that.
feel trapped or like a prisoner to the medication.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's a way for them to feel like they've broken free.
Yeah. But then I
Hmm.
always say, you know what, that's a completely subjective choice, personally, if I was that old and on it and it was working, I'm not spending the last years of my life, which might only be a handful, be living in horrific anxiety or fighting withdrawal. No, thank you. Well,
Exactly.
but I would even up the dose. Forget it, I mean, do what you got to do to live you're at the
Last
finish
few
line,
years.
right?
Yeah.
Have a quality there. But I've seen people put themselves in horrific situations because it was more like ego or pride. I'm gonna beat this drug. And I was like, it's
Hmm.
not about beating the drug, it's about quality of life.
Yes, that's
That's what it's
exactly,
about.
weigh your risk versus benefit, and some of,
Yeah.
the benefit there is what is your quality of life going to look like?
Yeah. A couple more quick questions. I'll let you go here. I appreciate you so much staying on so long. I don't know if I
Sure.
told you we were going to go this long. Maybe you're
It's
thinking it was going to be a
okay.
lot less, and now you're regretting it. But thank you for hanging out so long and answering all these questions.
Sure.
Um, so a couple more. One ask insight into any insight she can provide into healing gut digestive issues and what holistic methods work well.
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, when you're going to heal the gut, you want to fix dysbiosis is a lot of times at the root. What I mean by that is the microbiome becomes more gram negative and disruptive into the gut than, you know, good, quote unquote, good bacteria.
Right.
So to heal that, we want to get on some good probiotics. So one that I really, really like is Megaspore probiotic by Microbiome Labs, because spore probiotics actually survive the gastrointestinal system and
Right.
actually kind of seed down there in the gut, but then they see what's going on and then they say, okay, we need more here. We can, help modulate. So they're modulators of the gut microbiome. They do a lot of work. They're fantastic. Lots of research on
Yeah.
spore probiotics. And then there's psychobiotics as well, bifidobacterium strain, certain lactobacillus strains as well that are in this megaspore. But then there's also ZenBiome Dual that also has specific targeted psychobiotics that you could leverage as well.
Right.
So that's a good place to start. And then depending on the level of, like, say if you have leaky gut, so like broadly speaking, if we're just going to fix dysbiosis, get on a good, good spore-based probiotic like Megaspore, like I said, or ZenBiome Dual, something like that. But if we're fixing a leaky gut, we need to know, well, what was the lipopolysaccharide, like how much was affected to see how aggressive we get, and
Yeah.
then what are we dealing with bacteria as well, which we could see in either like a GI map test or an oats test to kind of look and see what the general like bacteria is. And then based
Right.
off of that, if you do have a high bacterial count or even candida, which is fungal, we
Yeah.
have to treat that first. You can support it with probiotics, but you're going to have to treat those things. So that looks a little different. So
Right.
you would use antifungals or um, probiotics that specifically like Saccharomyces boulardii that will target those fungal, the candida. And then with bacteria, a lot of times you can use herbs like oregano and garlic that can help kill that bacteria without doing a lot of damage to the rest. Now, some people, depending on the type of bacteria, like there's one called HPHPA that is very, very toxic. It's a Clostridia type species of bacteria that you do have to be aggressive with. And a lot of times those herbal antimicrobials aren't going to be enough. So that's where you do have to leverage an antibiotic like vancomycin. And then you do a stepped approach, 10 days off
Right.
or 10 days on, 3 days off, 10 like that, to give yourself a
Right.
break in between. Um, to help to get rid of that. And then, you're proliferating the bacteria, and then there's the healing process. So then if you have LPS and then maybe you have zonulin or occludin that popped up in one of these tests that shows the barriers broken, that's where we really need to support you with like stuff like IgG,
Yeah.
which I said mega IgG, mega guard, which is going to help really support the intestinal lining. And things like marshmallow root, licorice root are going to be really good for healing the gut lining. And things as well as prebiotic fibers, to feed the healthy gut, but can also help in that process as well. Psyllium husk, prebiotic fiber, but also good for healing the lining. So there's a lot of ways that you can leverage different gut healing protocols, but you certainly want to, remove any toxins that are there. So you don't really know unless you test to see that, and then reinoculate and restore
Mhm.
with good, probiotics. And then you want to rebuild, the gut, and then you can start reintroducing, different foods. If you were reacting to foods, for instance,
Right.
then you could start, reintroducing after you've restored the gut.
Awesome. Excellent answer.
It's a lot to it's yeah, I tried that
Yeah,
was
it's
a
a lot.
long, yeah, it is a lot, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you mind if I ask you, just because you know so much about all of this, and people might be interested, I know I'm interested, like what supplements do you take personally? No, I know you're
Hmm,
not going through benzo, but just as someone who
yeah.
knows so much about this, what are your go-to things that you
So
do
I
daily?
take every single day in the morning with my lunch, which I do some intermittent fasting, so I don't I eat breakfast, but I eat breakfast at lunchtime.
Yeah,
Okay.
I feel
And
that.
it's my biggest meal. So I have my omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah,
And then I take it's a multivitamin, but it's called progenomics, because I have MTHFR, MTR, MTRR, and a bunch of other um, gene SNPs. So I take that one, progenomics, and it's basically providing me with enough multivitamins, but in the bioavailable forms.
right.
So that way I don't have problems with absorption. And then I take the Megaspore. That is my, every day. Now, I had to take vitamin D for a while and those kinds of things. I was low in B12 and folate, but once I restored those, then I went to just the multivitamin.
Right.
And then at night, I take magnesium glycinate, and I
Right.
take 400 milligrams of that, and that helps
Um,
with sleep for me and with calming and de-stressing.
right.
So that's what I do now, and that's what I continue to do. With the Megaspore, I just do one. You do two for clinical efficacy, like if you need to, but I just do one to as a maintenance.
Yeah. Now, when you take the fatty omega 3s, are you doing that for kind of an antidepressant effect and the heart health, or both, or more?
For both, for anti-inflammatory effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do it for that mainly because um and the type of diet that I also subscribe to, or is my lifestyle, so to speak, is like a Mediterranean anti-inflammatory style
Yeah.
diet.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah, so and that has a lot of omega-3s in it,
Yeah.
but my omega-3 indexes were still on the lower end
Right.
of optimal. They were considered normal, but they were on the lower end of optimal. And I also have problems with my in my genetics with breaking down cholesterol and those types of things, and
Yeah.
omega-3s help with that to
Yeah.
help increase HDL and lower LDL.
Right.
So that's why I do the omega-3s regardless, because I want to
Right.
make sure, even though I'm getting it from my diet, I need a little extra support based off of not only my genetics, but how they were expressing themselves in my labs. Because I was,
Yeah.
constantly, despite my diet, still high in triglycerides and LDL cholesterol.
Right. Yeah, I take a lot of similar things, and I'm very sensitive to a multivitamin, for example. So I got to kind of sometimes get those things. around, around it. I have to kind of have a workaround. So I might take like a vitamin C tablet or a low dose vitamin C, low dose vitamin D, things like
Hmm.
that, fatty omega-3. And then I'm a big fan of ginger and turmeric. I take that just
Oh
for
yeah, ginger and turmeric are
anti-inflammatory.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use
Really
them
like,
as needed at night in a tea.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
good, really good. I like green tea. Sometimes I'll take that. That's an
Hmm.
awesome one. Sometimes I'll take garlic. What else? Elderberry. I'm not a big like. I don't. Now I'm starting to sound like I have to take a ton of supplements. I don't. I take them at different times and stuff like
Yeah,
that. But
elderberry is good for your immune system. So if you're
yeah,
dealing with the immune system issues, elderberry can be very helpful. Or
yeah,
if you're dealing with the sickness or something like that.
yeah.
Hmm.
And I don't have a spleen, so I kind of take it as an extra
Oh,
little,
yeah,
little help there. Awesome.
absolutely.
All right. So one more question here. How does one treat deficiencies when one cannot tolerate supplements?
Well, that's where you have to do the stepped approach. And what I mean by that is start to introduce it with foods first. You're
Yeah.
not going to correct a deficiency. Believe me, when you're deficient, you need high doses of these nutrients. But when you're reacting, literally reacting to something, we have to do the kind of like an exposure therapy type thing and
Yeah.
slowly reintroduce it into your body via food.
Right.
Then you can get these things in powdered form.
Yeah.
Bulk supplements is a brand that has tons and tons of supplements just in plain powdered form,
Oh, awesome.
and the weight is milligram by milligram. So if you weigh 1 milligram,
Yeah.
that's how much of the vitamin you're getting is the milligram.
Great.
So you could do, you have a most of the benzo people have scales because they're used to cutting and all that. So you just use
Right.
that scale to measure out your powder and just do micro doses at a time.
Yeah.
And then slowly get to what I would call clinical dose. With vitamin D, you can get that in liquid form.
Right.
So oftentimes I will have people who say they're reacting to vitamin D say, okay, let's try a drop, just give you a little bit of, a drop of vitamin D, and then slowly until we can get it to, a full dose,
Right.
which would be like 2 full dropperfuls.
Yeah.
But you start with like taking a little, like a drop, and just slowly get yourself to,
Yeah.
the 2 full dropperfuls. At that point, you would just switch to like an oral tablet because it's going to be more cost effective than
Right.
getting the liquid.
That's great advice. And I'm right on the same page, but I've haven't been having people I would say like, start with like magnesium. I take magnesium at night. And I would say, well, get the gummies. Try to find a sugar-free gummy. So say
Mm-hmm.
it says take 4 to reach 400 milligrams. Take one and just take a little bite off it. Just, or cut a little, cut it in a quarter or something and do
Mm-hmm.
that for a week. And then you build up to the, 100,
Yeah.
200, 300, 400, whatever you want.
It's another way
But
of titrating. Yeah, with the
yeah,
gummies,
yeah.
that's a good idea because
But
you can break those up. With the capsules, it's hard you have to
yeah.
open them up and then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the powder sounds almost a better option because then you
Yeah,
can,
they have the
you know,
bulk. Yeah, it's called bulk supplements. It's like they have an orange label with like an orange guy on it or something. But you can get pretty much every supplement in powder form that they'll provide
yeah.
you in powder form. And then
Yeah.
there's omega-3s in liquid
Yeah.
that you can get. Carlson Labs has a super elite omega that I really like. It's very concentrated in liquid form, but you could start with little drops of that. So yeah, there are ways, to just slowly titrate you until you can tolerate it. Because if you're, especially you're nutrient depleted and you need those nutrients, you don't want to deprive yourself of them.
Sure.
You want to
Right.
give your body those nutrients. It's for
Right.
stability.
What are your thoughts on CBD? I found CBD to be pretty helpful. And I've had clients that have had success with it. And I've seen a lot of, first I was very skeptical because I thought it was a new.
Mhm.
And then the studies kept coming out and the people I would talk to. And what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, so when we're talking about CBD, this is not marijuana, this is not THC, this is not
Right.
psychoactive. I have to make that clear because I have people who take medical marijuana and it actually backfires on them.
Right.
So and I am against medical marijuana because of that. I've seen it happen so many times. And this is not just benzo community, this is overall mental health community. Medical marijuana has backfired on people quite a bit.
Yeah.
CBD is something completely different. It's the cannabinoid properties of
Mm.
the plant. And yes, very healing, can help with seizure disorder, can
Right.
reduce inflammation. So lots of studies out there on its efficacy, but this is one that will be hit or miss for people. And I believe with CBD, it's where you're getting it from
Right.
that really matters. So
Mhm.
making sure that you're getting it from a reputable source and looking to see what if there is a content of THC in it,
Right. Right.
because a lot of it'll be hidden in it. It'll say CBD, but it'll have some THC property in it. So always make sure the CBD you're getting says the percentage. If it has no THC, it'll say 0% THC. So you
Right.
don't want to just assume. If it doesn't say anything at all, then you have to assume there's some in there, but we just don't know, and you could potentially react to it.
Right. And it has it can also be a powerful anti-inflammatory, right?
Anti-inflammatory, yes.
So it has that effect.
Absolutely. Lots of studies
Um,
that show that for CBD.
awesome. There was one other something I was going to ask you about. I forgot now what it was. What are your thoughts on ketamine infusion? Have you seen
Oh,
success with that?
mm, unfortunately, no. Um, and I have to say this. It may be because I'm seeing, okay, so my office is right across the hall from a ketamine clinic
Right.
where they're getting infusions.
Right.
Okay, because so I do see a lot of patients coming from there, and wanting to, but it's like the ketamine, I don't know if it's because they're getting it in intravenous infusion, that it's, you know, causing this type of reaction, but it's almost like the depression symptoms are, short-lived. The antidepressant effects are short-lived, and then the person goes into a deeper depression.
Really
Long
interesting.
term is what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
There have been a couple of people that I could say, like, where they were like just one or two treatments and, wonderful, they're fine, and then I work with them after the fact and do nutritional stuff with them. But by and large, the people I'm getting from the ketamine place, it's because still in treatment resistance and they feel the ketamine made them worse.
Oh. Okay.
And so this goes again to, why were you depressed to begin with, or why were
Right.
you having problems to begin with? Is it something I would ever recommend to my people who are deprescribing? No, because
Right.
there's too many variables there. So I would never
Right.
say to someone who's coming off of meds, like, yeah, why don't you do a ketamine treatment?
Yeah.
Because I've seen people who are not coming off of any medications and it go completely wrong. So
Right.
I can't imagine what that would look like for someone who's coming off of medications and having, some struggles, to give them
Yeah.
ketamine, you know.
I have to say, I haven't had that experience with people. I've had people where they said it did nothing, but I haven't seen anybody have a bad experience. And I have, but in the benzos, when you're withdrawing, I generally don't recommend it just because I'm like, it's not it's a different kind of problem anyway. But I have
Yeah,
had clients that have
psychoactive
had,
properties and DPDR can exacerbate that. We have to
right.
remember.
Sure, that's a good point. But I've had clients that I've seen have like crazy but I would argue those clients were having way more depression than they were anxiety. But I've
Anxiety.
had clients within like 2 weeks come back and it's like you're talking to a new person. And I've seen that go really well. And I've seen it mostly go well on the other side of benzos when someone's like 3 years out and they're stuck in anhedonia or something like that. But
Mhm.
like you said, like I don't think there's anything that is a cure for that, right?
For
It's almost like a
withdrawal and
supplement. Like if it works, it might, and then we know when it works in like a neuroplasticity kind of building way.
mhm.
So if it works and it gets you your feet underneath you, but you still have to go back and do the good work, which to me is why the good work is always going to be king. It's always the top of the
Yeah.
mountain that we're trying to reach, you know.
Right.
But
And
I'll
the
take, yeah,
psychotherapy component, which they lack there, I think is also important.
yeah,
When you're getting it, if you're going to do ketamine, make sure you're doing the therapy component with it.
100%.
And I also wanted to say I do have one patient who came off Trintellix and had numerous things happen after the fact. He did well for a significant amount of time, but then had a stressful event, then had some autoimmune reactions happen. Long story short, he ended up significantly depressed and did some ketamine um, lozenge, like
Right,
the micro dosing it.
right, right,
And he was during this point in time was very suicidal, and we were going to try some lithium and try some
right.
other medications, and it was the ketamine that he got from a company called Joyous, I believe it was called,
Yeah,
that
right,
really helped him.
right.
So my experience besides that client has been more patients that are,
Yeah,
like I said, getting the intravenous infusions and doing multiple infusions. And it's almost
right.
like they become zombies. It's sad,
Yeah, yeah.
so I don't know
Wow.
if it's because they're just getting too much
Yeah, it makes you wonder.
of it.
Yeah. I don't
Hmm.
have enough experience to draw a super broad conclusion. I've had maybe, I don't know, 50 people or maybe something like that, maybe less that have come off it, you know, and I just noticed with benzos, it's like maybe 70% of them just say they just thought it was a waste of money. It didn't do anything
Hmm.
for them. I do agree with the people that are having a real profound battle with the DPTR, which could be for multiple reasons. I could see where an infusion would maybe exacerbate that a bit. You know, it's kind
Hmm.
of like you said, risk versus benefit. And I've also noticed that the ones that did the infusions, it does seem like it's heavier or it's harder on them. I think
Hmm.
I've seen better results with like you said, the companies like Mind Bloom or something like that, where they
Yeah, like a micro dosing.
the
Hmm.
microdosing seems good. And the last thing I'll say, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, and in a way, we're sharing opinions, but kind of experiences, right, with each other of
Hmm.
this. So I appreciate everything you're saying because that informs me more moving forward with people that bring ketamine. You know, so I'm always like, like I said, I don't like to tell people what to take or what not to
Hmm.
take, but sometimes when it's a last ditch effort, you go, maybe try it. You know, maybe it's worth
Hmm.
trying it. I mean, it's not going to stop benzo withdrawal, but it might help some depression or boost your neuroplasticity, perhaps
Or get you out of suicide.
get you
Yeah.
out of suicide and get you,
Suicidal ideation.
yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that changed my life before I got on benzos, and I was dealing with a lot of mental health issues, and I had gotten to a really dark place, where I was really in a dark place. And by chance, I had tried psilocybin mushrooms with a friend of mine, and changed my entire life. Changed my entire life. Changed my brain. I mean, I took it one time, had a kind of epiphany on it, and
Hmm.
I don't want to get too deep into that, but it was very, very personal, very spiritual,
Yeah.
and but not only that, not only was the psychological changes of like, oh wow, the breakthroughs you have with trauma or barriers, or a lot of times we just need to see ourselves from a different perspective can be so
Yeah.
incredibly profound, and a lot of times
Hmm.
the inability to see ourselves from a different perspective is exactly why we're neurotic, that we're
Yeah.
locked in a state of this or that, but I had this state, I had this experience, and but after that I noticed it was like my brain became a sponge. Like the fog lifted, all the negativity lifted, the anxiety lifted, and I went back to college. I mean, it changed my life in an undeniably profound way. And that was just 20, over 20 years ago. And even then, then it was like taboo because it was like, oh, that's a drug, or that's an illegal drug, that's psychedelic. And then there was still this hangover from like the 1960s of like, and there's a lot of, I'm a big fan of like psychedelic research and such. And I
Hmm.
know, but the 60s, there was good and there was bad. Of course, it was
Hmm.
almost like a new technology or something that they were using. And you saw a lot of people do a lot of dumb things and maybe went too far out and this and that. So there was like this connotation to something like psilocybin with a lot of people. It was like, ooh, just a knee-jerk reaction away from it. but I found it to be just an absolute like game changer. And so, 20 years later, I've been keeping up with it from like John Hopkins is leading
Hmm.
the research in this country right now
There's
on
a
it,
lot of research, yeah, being done on that. Hmm.
and they're proving like, for me, it was very validating because like, oh my God, I saw this personally, and I saw it in several people that I know, their lives, and I saw them
Yeah.
change. And
Yeah, I've had a couple of clients try it and do very,
it was
very well.
very well, right? That's what I was getting at. So I've had it.
Micro dosing, not like to get,
Microdosing, no.
yeah.
Yes, let that be known. Do not take mushrooms to trip.
Yeah,
That will
because you
be a
can go in
horrible.
states like Michigan,
Yeah,
Oregon, Colorado,
yeah,
where it's decriminalized.
right, right.
And so people are going to, and then some people here in Florida are getting it underground, which I'm like,
Sure.
oh, I don't know,
Yeah, it's risky because
you
you got to
got
get
to
the
be
right mushroom.
careful. Yeah.
Get the wrong mushroom, it's going to be a bad time. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I couldn't deny it. That it was life changing for me. I never took it, never microdosed or anything after that experience, not after benzos or anything, especially not on benzos. I was too scared. But I had many clients now, and I mean, probably in the hundreds at this point, that took psilocybin, microdosed it, and did amazing on it, like had amazing results. I mean, one guy, he was like 70 years old, and he was
Wow.
completely not of that mindset. I mean, he was like totally against it, and he's like, my son gave me a little piece, and and he's microdosed for like a week, and I mean, I saw directly talking to him, his whole mindset and everything had shifted, and I had
Yeah.
multiple clients that tapered, took psilocybin, microdosed almost all the way through their taper, and were just thriving on it. And again, that works in a similar fashion of building neuroplasticity in the brain, and
Neuroplasticity. Yeah.
right. So we're talking about
Hmm.
just microdosing, but that's another one. Those stem cells I have my eyes on, and the microdose, I'm really paying close attention to that because I think those two things, from an outside perspective, could be very powerful. But again,
Yeah.
you have to do the work. There's no way getting around it. You could take all the mushrooms, ketamine, stem cells, whatever the hell it is that to grow your brain back, but keeping it there is going to be another
Right.
scenario.
If you don't do anything with it. Hmm.
Right. So you're echoing the same thing I've seen in this, because I don't think I've seen anybody have a bad experience on it. I've seen it again where it's like hit or miss. They go, I did nothing. And then
Yeah, the
I've seen,
psilocybin.
yeah, yeah. But I've never seen
Yeah, I've just had a
anybody,
few patients. Like I said, it's not legal here, but I've had a few patients and clients that have either gone to other states like Michigan, like they're part-time here and they go up
right?
north, that have done it and have done very well. The few that I've had
Yeah.
that said that they've tried it and
Yeah, it's
they
very
seem to be
interesting, right?
doing well
Yeah.
on it. So yeah, we're in the process of getting them off of their antidepressant because they're doing so well.
Right. How cool is that?
So yeah.
I interviewed Amanita Dreamer. She's kind of a figure in the community of Amanita muscaria mushrooms and
Hmm.
psychedelic mushrooms. And I interviewed her and she told me her benzo story. And she was such, I was literally tapering off benzos, stuck, suicidal, and I went for a walk in the woods like as the last goodbye. I mean, she was just completely at the end of her rope, as I recall the story, and found an Amanita mushroom and then took it, and it completely changed her life. Like it was the same, a
Wow.
very same scenario or similar scenario where it did something to her brain, and then she started, I think, microdosing it, and was able to finally taper off and stay off all meds, and has just been, now she's just a big champion of these mushrooms, which so
Yeah.
we're so early into this to know, like, I don't think there's ever, to my knowledge, been a study done on benzos and microdosing. So I don't know if that ever even, I don't think that exists really. But
No,
it would be interesting to keep an eye on, with John Hopkins and what they're doing, if they would shift
absolutely.
their focus into this area.
Hmm.
Maybe it could be a powerful, I look at it like a supplement. Of course, it's not going
Hmm.
to be the fix all, but if it gives you that edge, even if it's 5 or 10 or 15%, for a lot of
Yeah.
us, that's what you need to just get through this damn
To
thing, so
get
you
through
don't
it
get
and to
stuck.
then, right, like you said, it expands your mind, the neuroplasticity, but then also the
Yeah,
perspective point of expanding your mind to see other avenues. So it could help you see your way out and
right.
see, a new perspective on your current situation.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Giselle, I'm going to let you go because you've been so gracious to sit here and be patient and let me ask you 100 questions and talk your ear off for 3 hours. And I really do appreciate it again. And
Absolutely.
I think this was probably very helpful for a lot of people, so I really appreciate it. Um, I want to say before I go, not just to say thank you to you, but to anybody listening, just another friendly reminder that, fear is a liar. And no matter how dark it is, no matter what you're going through right now, there is hope and you can heal, and nobody is permanently brain damaged on this. All right. That's just me saying that. I don't believe
Yes.
anyone's permanently damaged. I've worked with thousands of people from around the planet for the last decade, and I've never seen it. Everybody can heal. Sometimes it's a puzzle, it's a riddle to be solved. Sometimes
Yeah.
it means going back and fixing some things or untying a knot internally. But once you do, you can get moving forward again. So I want to give everybody that hope. And I think you echo that too, which makes it more validated.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's hope here, there's healing, there's lots of, just look for more for the healing stories that are out there versus, getting stuck in that fear paradigm, and you'll
Right.
start to make a shift towards healing. You'll see how powerful just grasping onto those little bits of hope can be as you
Mm.
move forward in this journey. And there is another side to this, and like I said, oftentimes it's very relatable to what your suffering is. You have a great suffering, you're going to have a great recovery and this great transformation that happens. So
Yeah.
look forward to that. And I thank you for having me. And I enjoyed this time because I know that your community, is looking for this hope. And I want to be
Sure.
able to give them that hope,
Yeah.
and let them know that there is hope there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Myself down,